In the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll start with our weekly COVID update before we talk about the pod for next week.
Public hearing first.
We'll start with the public hearing, Dot?
You want to do it?
Yeah, let's do that. So
Okay.
we
All right.
call for a public hearing.
Yes.
Right, this is a public hearing for the, somebody's not, okay. This is a public hearing for the, that we set for the 2022 town budget.
Right.
I guess we're opening it up to comments.
Sure.
Any comments on the budget?
You're in charge.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you have to come up here and identify yourself, please.
Firstly, my name is Paul Udon. I live down here on 97 South Ferry Road. My first question would be, or comment, is why something as important as the town budget, why have it on a Wednesday afternoon where, other than us pensioners and some other people who might be left today, are not able to be here physically?
The town budget process, it goes on for an extended period of time. It's open in work sessions. We discuss it on a regular basis. Now we follow the calendar that the state dictates, that we have to set the hearing, open it to the public for comment, close the hearing, and then adopt the budget.
And when is the next time we
The next town board meeting would be in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
A week from Friday.
A week from Friday.
going to be in the middle of the day again?
It's for town board meetings are at 4 o'clock, 4:30.
4:30. Some people.
And they're available on Zoom for it. All the meetings are hybrid.
Are we going to discuss later? I'm not actually used to this. I'm wondering, when we talk about taxes or the town budget, I know we have to pay property taxes. What other sources of revenue does the town have? The businesses? Anything from the federal?
No, we collect property taxes. Basically, that's it. That we collect property. Well, this board has instituted user fees to take away some of the tax burden on the general public and try to make it more user specific. But as far as we get revenue, we get revenue from the county, we get public safety money, and that's all included in our revenues.
And did that change anything during last year, or anything expected to change during this year coming?
Yes, the revenues went up considerably. The mortgage taxes went up. Last year, the county cut out public safety money in half, but they reinstituted it when the federal government gave it back to the county. So we got that back. We put that back in the budget. Our revenues are generally up. And again, we're trying to institute more user fees. We're taking waterways management money, waterways management fund money that we collect for moorings and stuff, for moorings and docks, and we're applying them to any water related expenses that the town has, again, rather than going to the general tax base.
Okay, then the state cap is 2%, and in the reporter it says it's not unusual for it to be raised, and I can understand that as a need, and I may even agree. But can you tell me in a nutshell, what is the reason that we're going to almost double it in the course of
We're going to almost double it, and if you look at the history over the last 10 years, 3.9 is the lowest it's been in over 10 years. I tried in my statement to the public, I tried to say that this is a very real budget. When we meet with the other towns, when Amber and I meet with the East End supervisors and mayors, or when we meet with the Suffolk County supervisors, we can see how it's very easy to pad your budget to put in revenues that you're not going to achieve, and that's how you offset it. Or to likewise to fudge the numbers on the expenditures. Our budget is 100% accurate. We don't hide any money. We go very conservative on our revenues. So probably we could have put it down another point if we went with revenues that we probably will get, but I won't take that chance that we don't get those revenues.
Now, probably two last points. Is the capital budget and the fiscal budget or the operating budget separate? We just recently incorporated the capital budget into our budget. We've never really had a capital budget. Amber, you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, it's always been like we've had various line items that funded capital expenditures. So this was the first year that we pulled it out so that it is clearly separately stated. But it has to be funded from either grants or from tax revenues. So we've got a clearer picture of how that happens.
Yeah. The final question or comment, hypothetical. Since COVID came, the price of Long Island real estate has gone crazy. Coming from the city, I know everybody who fled out here.
Yeah.
The question is, in next year, between the building that took place during COVID and the home improvements for the people who came to the island, the tax assessment and the tax rolls have got to look better next year than they do now. Are we going to next year be going for another two full percent? Because the mathematics of it is.
It's hard to say that, and historically, Shelter Island has not addressed the needs of the future. Quite honestly, they've tried as hard as they could to keep the taxes down, not do any capital planning, not look at long-term issues. And my feeling, quite honestly, when I got on the first time 20 years ago, we were in another upsurge, and I asked the previous administration, with all this increased money, are you addressing, are you looking to address needs? And it was, no, let's keep everything, safe. Let's do it. Let's play it safe. And that's kind of always been the attitude here. And this board has felt, we have needs, we have issues that we need, and we can't stop pretending we don't have ADA compliance issues we're going to have to address. We have building issues we have to address.
What's the ADA?
American Disability
American Disability Act, handicap access, and those things. So we've started those processes. Again, we have a 5-year plan for capital improvements, and each year we project what we're going to have to put into it. So yes, we probably will see more of an assessment on the island. We'll see more the taxes will be spread more evenly, but I can't say it's going to cut our expenses.
And there's a couple of different, to address your question a little bit more in more detail. When real estate prices go up, what it does is it takes a pie and it makes it bigger. Mm-hmm. But if everyone's real estate values go up evenly, you still have the same percentage of the pie. So the fact that our assessment has grown doesn't have an impact on how much you pay in taxes. New construction will add to the pie. And so what will end up happening is we've got revenues going, what we need to get from tax revenues going up by 3.9%. But if the construction has added to the value, your tax rate may not go up 3.9%, depending on how much new construction's been added. It could be 3.5%. A good example of that is over at the fire district. If you look at the budget that was published there, you can see that the tax revenues raised increased by a certain percentage, but the tax rate did not go up by the same percentage. So I don't know if I'm explaining that concept.
Okay, let me just see if I'm right. I just built a shed, didn't need a permit, but by the time it's done, Amber, not Amber, but Christine's video comes over and looks at it and it says my shed is worth $20,000. My taxes will go up several dollars because now I have a work shed on my property.
Yes.
And she'll assess that in. But not necessarily will my taxes change the full amount.
Yeah, if you've increased your value, then because of that shed, mm-hmm. So your piece of the total town pie has just gotten slightly bigger. So your tax rate could go, your tax bill could go up slightly because of that.
Okay.
And I just want to underscore there's not a building or an asset that we have here in town in the last 6 years since I've been on the town board and doing capital planning that we haven't made major inroads on. If you take a look at police headquarters, all that brick pointing in the window replacement, Justice Hall.
Oh, I appreciate these things. I just,
Right across the street, a lot of our neglect has been in two areas, marine assets and roads. Roads we've caught up on in terms of paving. We continue to make good inroads on roads, but road elevations now are a big thing because of global warming and sea rise. We are confronted with the fact that many of our roads, not many, but there are key roads within the town that flood during extreme high tides. We don't have to have a hurricane or anything. Just the past week was a perfect example of where West Neck was under, well, Ram Island Road that we're concerned about in parts, Ram Island Drive, going into West Neck, that road that goes in there, West Neck Drive. There are roads that are, so we're in the process right now of trying to take corrective action through a capital plan that is just being finalized as we speak to spread that cost out over a long period of time. Our job, as we met this morning, the five of us, and that's Amber and I, two-fifths are right here, and the town engineer and Brian Sherman, who's in charge of highways, and Jim Reed. He has a mitigation plan that he's working on to try to mitigate all of those possible threats to the island. So I don't want to say that anybody has neglected. I'm not looking to put fault on anybody or any administration or anything else in the past. It just, a lot of this stuff has come to the forefront in the last few years. And if we don't start to take corrective action. So rather than jump the budget up like 10, 15, 20% to take all this corrective action, we do two things. We tried as hard as we can to get grants. We've taken in about $3.5 million worth of grant monies in the last 4 or 5 years, mostly gone into our roads, but there's not a thing that we haven't done that hasn't been partly grant funded. So even the improvements that we're making down at the recycling center as we speak. So that, you know, we've tried to work real hard there, and we've tried through other ways to finance those things, you know, and I think we've been fairly successful. And you know, as the country wrestles with this infrastructure problem, I would like to think that Shelter Island is far out ahead of the nation in terms of taking care of its infrastructure and the threat that we have as being an island. You know, even with the ferry terminals, a simple little thing like raising the plazas up, putting longer ramps on to accommodate emergencies during storm times to get ambulances on and off the island. It's a big challenge, but we're working with the state, we're working with the federal government. And now that the stimulus money is out there to take advantage of it, it's up to the grants committee and our grants writer, she's just a part-time person. Again, we spend about $30,000 a year on her position, but through those last 4 years, we paid her $120,000. She's taken in several $1 million worth of grant monies to help us tackle this particular problem. And she's excellent at what she does.
I appreciate all the changes. I've been coming to Shelter. I've only lived here for 6 years, and I'm 75% here, 25% back home with the grandkids. But I don't want to be contentious. But let me say, being a New Yorker, I see capital improvements all the time that nobody considers that after the thing is built, whatever it is, that there is maintenance and labor that goes in it, and it flops off into the operating budget. Say the green spaces that need to be mowed, need to be weeded, have trees cut down, they have to go to the highway department.
But they're subsidized by the 2% fund.
Okay.
2% fund pays for anything related to.
But you know, that's a concern for me, that it just doesn't grow less.
Yes.
But otherwise,
you know,
I'm pretty happy.
there was a prime example just with equipment at the recycling center. We used to go out and rent a grinder for approximately $110,000 a year. And we can only get it at certain times after a storm when the demand was great. Somebody would bring it over, we'd use it, we'd return it. We went out and bought a $710,000 grinder at a 50-50 grant. So that's $305,000 we had to lay out. That was over 3 years ago. We just got the check back from $305,000. So everything now that grinder goes forward for the next hopefully 15 years, that's saving the town $110,000 every year. It's going to be $1.5 million saving buying that one piece of equipment that we used to rent. Same thing with the excavator, same thing with the replacement of the trucks that we have in our fleet. We're trying to do it the best way we know how. in terms of trying to save taxpayer money to be able to move forward with these other initiatives.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time. Anybody else?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a few questions on a specific area and some observations, and it's more of a long-term thing rather than anything that's urgent in terms of you need to change, or maybe there's one suggestion I have. And I'm going to focus on the police department budget. And if you thought affordable housing was the third rail, maybe this is the true third rail. But and in terms of the scope, in terms of the gentleman who just spoke, the police budget, I think, is about 2.16 million altogether, which doesn't include animal control these days or whatever, of a 13.66 million budget. So it's about 15% of the budget. It's probably the biggest part of the budget. And one of the comments I have about is the transparency concerning this part of the budget. I wasn't available to be here. I was in Manhattan and had some work to do there when you went through the police budget, but I did watch it subsequently on television or the streaming. And by the way, I apologize. I was up late last night watching these elections, and it's kind of, a little fuzzy for me right now. But so I was watching this, and then when you got to the discussion of the major part of the police budget, which has to do with the salaries and vacation and all that, your comment was, and it's a fair comment, was that was contractual, and there's obviously not much you could do, at this point in time concerning that. But it occurred to me that if during the budget section, you would say that it's contractual, so we can't really have any effect on that, so why discuss it? Then when the contract is up, and the current contract will be up the end of next year, right? I got a copy of it here. I was taking a look at it in connection with just looking at the subject. So it's going to go through December 31st, 2022. And I would assume that this is a union negotiation that the town board will be involved with over the next year. And a lot of your discussions are going to occur during an executive session, because a lot of it has to do with,
All of our discussions
would be in an executive session. So the process itself, I'm not accusing anyone of not being transparent, but the process itself has a built-in opacity because of when you get to the town budget, it's contractual. And when you get to the contract, it's all behind closed doors. And the public doesn't really have an opportunity to take a look at what's going on. And in connection with that particular item, 15%, of the town budget. Now, the other thing that I noticed with respect to the transparency argument or the transparency issue is that it's for many years, I don't have full town budgets with me, but for many years, the copy here, page somewhere here. What I did. Just one sec. I think I'm missing a page here. Anyway, here it is. So for many years, the town budget, up until about 2019, right? You used to list every officer's salary, but something happened in 2020.
We still do. It's an addendum to the budget.
It's an addendum?
It's there.
Is it online?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
Because
is.
it wasn't a part of the main budget.
Right.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
You're correct.
I
Same
missed
with the
it.
highway.
Because it used to be in the budget itself. So I noticed that it was all condensed into 1.2 million with only Officer Reed's salary separated. So I don't know if anyone looking at the budget, they might have made the same mistake I did and not look at the addendum. But these are fairly significant salaries, and I want to just talk process issues because over the next year, guys, you're going to have to get involved. The public should know that Chief Reed's salary is going to go to 192,000. There are others, 141,000, 124,000, 121,000. I'm getting there. So my point there was transparency, but you corrected me. Okay, but I mentioned this because in the arbitration that occurred back in the last arbitration that I'm aware of that you guys, the town was involved with is 2011, I think, with the police Shelter Island Police Benevolent Association. It went to an arbitrator, and there are 4 criteria.
I'm not certain.
Yeah, I don't know about I'll be interested to know whether there's been an arbitration since 2011. There was also one in 1995, I think, too, that I got.
I think the majority, and Chief Reed, you might be able to chime in. As far as I know, it's almost always gone to arbitration.
Okay.
Chief, did the last one go to arbitration?
No, I think there's been a few years since arbitration. It may have gone to mediation, which is close to that. But largely we're able to, and I'm separate from the union, so I will tell you that in most cases we're able to negotiate. But I would say arbitration is always lurking, if you want to call it that.
Okay,
so
the last.
Go back to the budgets to tell you which ones.
Okay, so I had the 2011 one, which was 10 years ago. I think this is the last one. I'm not certain. I did ask for all the arbitrations, and this is, what I got. So in the arbitrator, issued a ruling, and in the course of doing that, it talks about the criteria that the arbitrator uses in connection with determining the result, of the arbitration. And there are 4 criteria.
I don't mean to cut you off, but what does this have to do with this budget?
It has everything to do with this budget.
But
Okay.
we're 2 years away from the next contract.
If you remember, the point of my comments and observations today have to do with the lack of transparency of the process.
Everything you talk about has to do with a lack of transparency.
And you always proclaim to be the most transparent
And I
person on
am.
the planet.
And I am.
Well, you're shutting me down now on an issue.
Because I don't see what this has to do with this
Because if
budget.
I can't,
This is a budget hearing for this specific budget.
this is a public
We want to
hearing.
talk about going forward, what we're going to do in the future for future budgets or for a contract that hasn't even been discussed yet, then that's for another time. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see.
You're wrong.
As this, I'm not asking you.
I'm telling you
I'm
you're
not sure
wrong.
that this is the place for this discussion right
Let me ask you this. If it was a town work session, you don't need to let me speak, right?
And I
If-
also
if
have a
it's-
timer here that I didn't turn on because you've spoken for about 10 minutes so far.
But what I'm
Now,
telling you,
We'll start now.
okay, so what
Don't
I,
take offense to that, by the way. I get this all the time.
I don't take offense at it. I take offense at the fact that this is a public hearing and your job is to listen.
Yes, related.
Your job is to listen.
To this
Bob, I think
specific
your
budget.
I think your message as we move forward, and you made your point that as this.
No,
this
I
is-
have no other chance.
Can you let him finish what he's saying?
Go ahead.
You say it comprises 15% of the budget, $2.6 million, and I get all that. And you putting a red flag out to the board, and with maybe future town board members in attendance or not in attendance here today, to be more careful and diligent as we move forward with negotiations. And I get that. I would want to point out that unlike a lot of police chiefs that strictly are the police chief for the police department, Chief Reed wears a lot of hats. Putting together this mitigation plan and acting on all of the things entitled in mitigation. The emergency management, he's the emergency manager for the town. He also was extremely active during COVID-19 in terms of being on with the core group of people be able to get through COVID-19. I think our chief, by the way, wears so many hats and does so many things.
I'm not,
He's a quality human being that
course he
really is an outstanding asset to this town. I will agree with you that as we replaced younger officers from senior officers, there was a major savings in salaries there. However, over a fairly short period of time, those salaries increased fairly significantly. After the 4th or 5th year, they start to go up fairly significantly. Unlike I used to be in, kind of like in teaching where you went up your, you went from making $8,000 a year in 1971 to making $100,000 by 2006.
Mhm.
Those increases were 7-8% plus increment, plus
Mhm.
all the other incentives that people have.
Sure.
In education.
I'm not here to question how hard these guys work, how well they work. I was extremely impressed by the whole COVID thing last February and March. It was brilliant. The police department ran it. It was the best thing I ever seen government do in my life. Okay. I'm not here to criticize that. I don't have any I have no idea whether we have too many officers, too few officers, whether they're paid too much, whether they're paid too little. I'm not making any judgments.
I think just.
But you're taking some of my time, all
No, I
right?
know,
So
but the supervisor's just asking you to, in nature of time and business, what would be the point of what do we?
my
need to
point
hear?
is that you can always shut me down, except
No,
during a
not-
public hearing, okay?
Not-
Unless I'm
There's a
being,
time limit that.
it's a
I'll
reasonable,
get cut into you.
we're talking about 15% of the town budget.
Yeah, it's a significant.
We're
Okay.
talking about a philosophical issue.
No, it's not
going
philosophical.
forward. It has nothing to do with this.
Well,
budget now. This budget is contractual. We discussed it. It's available for the.
We can't do it this way. I'm sorry.
Well,
I have an
Going
opportunity.
forward.
I have an
say that. Going forward, we can't do it.
You can always shut me down. You can't do it during a public hearing. It's
Yeah,
not
I
your,
can. I
that's,
can.
yes, no, you can't.
Yes,
I'm
there's a
not being
time limit.
disruptive. You're being
There is a time
disruptive.
limit
I don't
there.
have a chance to talk. What is going on
We've
here?
spoken for 10 minutes now.
So I had 10 minutes, but then you interrupted me. Now I'm learning how great the
You
police
still have
department
10
is.
minutes.
All right, you're giving me-
The next 10
Now
minutes.
you're giving me 10
Well,
minutes.
why don't you
I'm
make
giving you
Rick-
5 minutes.
All right, let me move ahead.
And by
Okay.
the way,
So last week, then just so the town knows, last week, November 1st, I guess there was an article in the New York Post about how Suffolk County doesn't require the policemen to take, force them to do vaccines, et cetera. And that the supervisor
Does
of
this
the,
have anything to do with the budget?
yes.
Vaccines has
It
something
does.
to do with the budget.
Well, okay, the starting pay for NYPD and Suffolk County cops is currently $42,000. Okay? But the city cops, New York City cops, max out at $86,000 annually. Long Island officers and wages nearly double to $155,600 after 11.5 years of service.
What does
Would
this
you
have to
stop
do with
interrupting
the
me?
2022 budget? This is a budget.
I am
hearing.
speaking. I'm getting to my.
I'm asking you.
I'm making an
I will
argument. It
cut
has
you off.
everything.
I can cut you off.
It has everything.
What does
to
it
do
have
with
to
it.
do
Would
with the
you
2022
shut up?
No, I won't. Answer the
Let
question.
me finish.
What does it have to do with the 2022 budget?
The 2022 budget is based upon a process that is completely untransparent. Okay. And I don't think the town did its job years ago. And I'm trying to point that out so you don't make the same mistake in the future. I'm also trying to increase the transparency of the process to the public. I didn't mean to get upset. I didn't mean, but why am I being attacked when you give me 10 minutes to talk? And then you stop me after like 30 seconds.
What you're talking about has nothing to do with
That's
this
not
budget.
your business.
This is
It
it is my business.
I'm getting to my
This
point.
is a budget hearing, Mr. Cohn.
let's give it 2
I'm
minutes.
sorry.
2 minutes.
I have the ability to speak
2
in
minutes.
paragraphs
Oh my
and you
God.
don't.
Let's
Okay.
go. Get 2 minutes to finish up the.
Not 2 minutes to finish.
Yes, 2 minutes to finish up.
Okay. So the Suffolk County Police is considered winning the lotto for New York police officers. Okay. That's my point there. The 4 criterion that are used by an arbitrator and by you in negotiating a police contract. Okay. The most important one is criteria C. Okay. Which is a comparison of the peculiarities of a job of its members unit involved in interest in other trades and professions. And it also, he said, law enforcement is unique and those employed in this field can only be compared with others in that field. The arbitration, they decided for some reason to compare Shelter Island to the other towns on the East End. Now, the other towns on the East End, okay, are highly compensated just like the rest of Suffolk County. There's a process that's going on here that seems outrageous because if you take a look at the physical, the costs, specifically the hazards of employment, physical qualifications. Let me ask you something, Supervisor. Do you know what the crime rate for violent crime on Shelter Island is?
Let me ask you.
No, I'm asking you a question. Do you know? Let me finish.
We don't.
It's 8.6.
No, save your time. No.
It's 8.6. Violent crime in New York City is 28.2. So we have salaries on the West End. I'm not just Shelter Island. It's the entire Suffolk County. That's twice as New York police. And it's got a third of the hazards, okay,
and would
of
you
other police
acknowledge
officers.
that every time an officer goes to work, there's
I'm
a
not-
chance that he could be shot?
We might have 4 more officers on this island.
Will you acknowledge that that's a possibility?
Okay.
You
So
put your life on the line every time you
So
go
the
to
guy
work?
in the Bronx, police officers earning $86,000, has been on their force for 11 years, making $86,000 a year. You got a guy here earning $150,000 a year, and the crime rate is almost 3.5 times
What's your point?
in the Bronx.
What's your point? Should they hide? They should pay
My
people in the
point
Bronx
is-
more money.
So my point is,
Yeah.
If you stop interrupting me, I would do this very simply and it would have been done in 10 minutes. But my point is that when it came to the town went to the last arbitration and the arbitrator said, quote, "The town did not produce an economist in support of its economic position. It merely produced a series of articles in the statement of its supervisor." By the way, in 2011, were you the supervisor?
You know, I wasn't.
You wasn't. I didn't know you weren't. I was just curious. So, but somebody was. So somebody didn't go with an economist to an important arbitration that basically put this town on a line of the compensation of its officers. We might have 4 more officers on the street if we felt we needed it for the same money that we're spending today. That is one of my points.
What you're saying, cut the salaries in half and hire 4 more?
No, I'm not saying that.
I guess
I'm
that
not
goes along with your affordable.
No, I'm not saying that, but take a look at some of the other things. They get a longevity benefit. It's part of your line
All
item.
right, I'm going to cut you off now.
No,
I'm cutting you off now. This has nothing to do with this budget. You can come in the future and talk to us about this issue. This has nothing to do with this budget.
Are you kidding? I'm reading from your budget. What does longevity mean? Does anyone in the audience here know what
It's a
longevity means?
contractual
You
issue.
work for the town, you do, right? Right? Okay. So
Bob, why don't you finish up if you can conclude what you want
I'm
to tell
just
us?
pointing out the number of vacation days is 20 for
All
some.
right, you're talking about a contract that's in place. You can talk about that when we go
But
to
I
negotiate.
can't,
When we
because
go
it's
to
gonna be in
negotiate
secret a
a
year
new
from now.
contract, you can raise. maybe
No, I
these are
can't.
issues you should look at.
I'm not going to be in the executive session, and
No,
neither was
but you
anyone
can
else.
come
in
to a
this
work session and say, I think these are issues maybe we should.
It's a
look at.
work session, and you can tell me, just like you're now, you're talking too much, get the hell out of the building.
Basically, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
but this is a public hearing.
And you're
this
done.
is different.
And you're done. We've heard from you. Thank you very much.
I do have a couple of comments.
Yep, that's right.
I do have a couple of comments. Earlier, you mentioned about the salary piece being condensed. That was done a couple of years ago because we have, especially with respect to the highway department, and sometimes when we have retirements and new people coming on, we were doing like lots of gymnastics with budget transfers. Like this person didn't use up this much line because they were in brush and weeds, and then they went over into highway. So we were doing so many transfers that we decided to, in the budget, to cut down on that, have one line item. I did, while you've been speaking, look at the budget that got posted and apologize because I did not notice that the salary backup sheets are not.
There you go.
So I do apologize.
So
for not
it was
catching that.
I'll accept that
So
on behalf of the public, as an apology for the lack of transparency that I didn't see it when I
Lack of
downloaded it.
transparency. It was on our worksheets. It was, for some reason,
Yeah.
it wasn't put
Yeah.
on.
You called a public hearing. This public hearing should be postponed because the budget was
It should
not
be
transparent.
so I apologize
So,
for that.
okay.
And then with respect to, salaries on Shelter Island versus the rest of Suffolk County, it is a much more complex process that takes place because we are competing against other municipalities within Suffolk County to hire good police officers. So if we underpay here, very low compared to some other place, we will not keep our people. They will
Yeah,
go elsewhere.
but that's not a choice.
So-
They're asking even for more each year. They're asking for
So-
more sick pay. They get
Yes,
sick pay
yeah,
that
no, and that's
they-
all part of the
they
negotiation.
can save
I'm just-
115 days of sick pay for their retirement.
but I'm
Okay?
just- Yes, I mean,
They can, their vacation goes over from you. They can take 15 days of vacation to the next year and then get paid half of that, or it's 10 days.
Mhm.
They get paid half of that in January. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you are putting in this budget to
That are-
deal with
yes.
all these perks that even if they look at the salary, okay,
Mhm.
some of these guys can take those vacation days and they can be electricians. They can be plumbers. They can do other things on the island. Okay. And I'm not even,
It's called a
And,
side job.
and it doesn't break out the overtime per officer, so you don't really
and
know
that's-
how.
Yeah, and that's flexible because you don't know.
Fair
But,
enough.
but we're also, if you look at the contracts of other
Okay,
neighboring
well,
towns, they have similar provisions.
I-
So we're competing against the other
Okay.
towns for talent.
And I think that should be a voluntary competition, not something that's forced by an arbitrator based upon information the town didn't supply. If you did a proper job and hired an economist, I think they could have done it. Maybe not on the salaries, but certainly on all those perks that are costing the town a fortune. But I do appreciate your correcting the supervisor who suggested that it was on it because it wasn't on the posting.
I thought
And it
was
wasn't as
too.
trans.
So that's why I looked.
All right, terrific.
One other thing, just for clarity with regard to the process.
while the negotiations themselves will be in executive session, the vote on the contract has to be in public meeting, and it does have to, and the contract itself has to be publicly available before that. So we'll have an opportunity to see it before,
After you've negotiated it.
after it's negotiated, but before it's voted upon.
All right, but that doesn't help anyone.
You can come and
Here's my suggestion, Robert.
Oh.
We have months and months and months well before we go into negotiations on next contract. Take the time, sit down at a computer, write out some of your notes, share it with the town board and say, listen, when the time comes and prior to negotiations, please focus in on the following 5 areas that I think need to be focused in on. And we'll read that and take that into negotiations. And then that goes for anybody in the public on any bargaining unit. If you have concrete suggestions on things that you think are, whether they're disproportionate or unfair or poor practice, put it in writing, share it with the town board, and I would promise you that it will be looked at. I can't say that everything will be rectified to that person's satisfaction, but surely that's an opportunity for a taxpayer, to talk to the town board prior to negotiations to give some insight into a negotiation.
Well, I would suggest that it's been 10 years and it's probably time for another arbitration. All right. And then just when push comes to shove, do a much better job in going into the arbitration that was done 10 years ago.
If you do your homework and look at arbitration, 99.9% of the time, it goes in favor of the bargaining unit. When I was on the board 20 years ago, I took over an arbitration that was in place when I was there. And after that, I said to our outside counsel at the next, because the arbitration was done and the contract was over, we had to start again. So I said to our outside counsel, I said, let me see if I can talk to the union myself and negotiate. And he said, you're out of your mind. It'll never happen. Well, we did. We did it ourselves. We did a cost of living increase that the entire town did, all the employees, the highway department, and it worked. So arbitration is if anything, it's the worst resort, because the arbitrators always go in favor of the bargaining units.
Let me ask the town council, is the arbitration binding with the police department or any of these unions? Or can you file a lawsuit to oppose the arbitrator's decision?
We haven't done one since I've been here.
It's binding arbitration.
It's binding, Bob.
Yeah, okay.
It is binding.
Yeah.
Okay, so the only way to really affect those negotiations is through public participation.
It's
And-
trying
and-
to work.
And public participation after you've negotiated the contract is too late.
I wouldn't say public.
So I just,
I would never recommend public participation in a bargain, in a contract negotiation.
yeah, what I'm trying
We
to,
would take public input and then bring that information.
yeah, but you're not
to the-
taking
to the
public
table.
input because you were happy to shut me down in 10 minutes.
Well,
So don't give me that
I'll
crap.
take from you, maybe.
I think there is a time for public participation in the process, but it's after the contract has been negotiated, but before it's been approved.
Well, no, it can also be, getting ready to start negotiations. What concerns does the community have?
Yeah, but I think you're correct about it not being part of the,
Oh, it's definitely not part of the negotiation. Okay.
Supervisor, if I can just comment just briefly, one thing to the speaker, I've never met him before that I know of. I'd be glad to sit down, and my office is open if you want to get clarity on police contract. It's a public document. If you want to get clarity on the police budget, also a public document, I'd be glad to sit down and discuss those items with you. And just to hit on a few things on the East End, we probably have that 15% you're talking about of the overall operating budget is probably the lowest of any of the East End towns or villages. Recently, Amityville, if you saw in Newsday about a week ago, settled their contract. Their police department is 50% of the operating budget. And don't, please, this is not meant to argue back and forth ideals. And I would love to sit down with you if you wanted to talk about some of the concepts that you talked about. As you know, I work for the community and our budget's open. And if you want to clear up or discuss anything in comparisons to other towns and some of the benefits that our police officers get, my door's open if you want to reach out.
Thank you. I welcome that opportunity. But one thing, this has to do, again, specifically with the budget. There's a $45,000 for a car.
Yes.
I didn't get the whole story about that as to why we needed to have, is it one of the kind of the police cars that you have now? Is it another one of those? Is
Yes.
that the new one?
Yes.
Okay, and another one's going into retirements, or you just need?
Well, we
another
don't
car?
retire. We actually use them in the building department and other departments. We never take a vehicle after 3 years and use in the police department and just get rid of it.
Okay, you know, I saw.
We work it through the entire town.
Last time I was in Sag Harbor, I saw a police car, but it was one of those little smart cars. I mean, obviously they were using it for traffic control or whatever and whatever. I'm wondering why we need to have, I don't know how many cars we have, but why do we need 8 $45,000 cars when maybe if this only the control people are using a car, well, we have to have that kind of expense.
You know, specifically, I think you should take Chief Reed up on his.
I will.
information.
Our most recent
Fair enough.
car was an electric car for the
Well,
TCO purposes.
Well, electric was for the environment and whatever, I'm sure.
But
I'm talking about
yeah, no, but I mean.
significantly less money.
TCOs Yeah, the TCOs are
Yes.
like now using a
Yes.
different vehicle.
Yeah, that came into being because of the price of the vehicle
Okay.
And
and the environment as well.
Thank you, Chief.
and lastly, since.
No problem.
Since I mentioned that the budget online did not have those backup schedules, I have gotten notification that it's been re-uploaded with the schedules.
Very good. Thank you so
We
much.
have good staff.
Anybody else? Okay, we're gonna close the hearing. Okay, we're gonna close the budget hearing and go into our work session. Amber, you want to start us off with the COVID update?
Yes, for COVID, our official count is still at 83, so we didn't have any increases this week. And from the county, Suffolk County 7-day rolling average on positivity rate, we've gone from 2.6% to 2.3%. And our new daily cases for the county are trending down. So all the numbers are headed in the right direction. We have our booster pod coming up next Tuesday.
Week from today.
Yep.
Yep.
And
No,
we
tomorrow.
have
Oh, yeah.
472 people have signed up out of 600 so far. Because the signups have started to slow down, Southampton, Stony Brook is going to be posting the booster pod on their website. So anyone who has not signed up and is still interested, please sign up soon because those last slots will start to close up. We have afternoon slots available only from between 1:50 and 5:50 p.m.
Okay, Amber, how many of the slots do we have filled?
472,
472 of 6?
600. Mhm.
All right, thank you.
And we'll just remind everybody, bring your vaccine card and wear a mask if school's in session.
Yes. Oh, and that's the other thing. There is some paperwork, a consent form that has to be filled out prior. So for everyone who signed up, we're in the process of getting from Stony Brook Southampton's IT group who has signed up so far. So we will be blasting out an email with that form attached. So if you can print the form, bring it with you, vaccination card, ID, you're good to go. We'll speed the process along, hopefully.
Okay.
That's good.
Chief, any other updates you want to give us?
No, Amber hit on the key areas that with definitely the positivity rates and hospitalizations and new daily cases are all coming down. So that's a good sign.
Yeah. Just thanking Dr. Dolger and the school board for supporting this, by the way. You know, it's took advantage of it last year. It's very nice that they offered their facility again this year. Even with the kids in school, that's very nice of them. We appreciate it immensely.
Okay. Okay, next on the list, we're going to go to try to finish up our discussion on the town code revisions so we can set a hearing at the next board meeting. Bob, there's 3 areas we want to talk about is the definitions, Article 16, and septic revision. First, we'll start with the definitions. We looked over them last week. You had discussions with Peter Reich about some concerns he had. That's in the final. That's all taken care of.
Yeah, that's been updated at this
Okay,
point.
in the final.
I spoke to Peter. I believe we resolved the questions we had. There were a couple of suggestions which I thought were very positive. One, for example, for the in the filming to add the add online usages, and so that's been changed.
Okay, so those are incorporated in this. So we have the draft, not final. So if everybody can look at this, we have one more work session before the town board meeting. If we want to change anything before we set the hearing.
Yep.
Okay?
If anybody could let me know before the meeting, so I
Yes.
can make the changes for the meeting.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Bob. Next is the Article 16, if you want to walk us through that one quick, Bob,
Okay.
what it is and what we're doing.
Yeah, I think we kind of went through this to some
Yeah.
extent, but basically this was a description of the function and structure of the government. It's really putting down in writing the various positions and committees, departments, because I think it's important to be able to have that. Basically, it's the way we've been doing things already. But it's good to have it in writing just so people can look at it and very easily understand.
And quite honestly, this is the crux of the matter here, is that the town's been doing things the way we've been doing them forever. And now we're getting people that are, I guess, a lot more sophisticated than we are, looking at the code and saying, well, you're doing this, but that's not what the code says. So we want to make sure that what we do and what the codes say are the same thing. So that's basically what we're doing. So same thing with this. This is, again, it's really, it is the final draft.
Yeah.
So if we can look at this one more
There's a couple little
time,
things I'm still,
any
in
issues
at the
for
end.
next week, next Tuesday, next Wednesday is the last discussion on this before we set the hearing. So same with that one.
there were a couple of positions I hadn't gotten around, that I hadn't put in that I realized the other day. And I'll
Okay.
add those.
All right, so we have one more week on that.
Yeah, I have some,
Go ahead, you
some,
wanna do it
no,
now?
like,
Go
no,
ahead.
no, I just some nits and gnats that I'll get to you.
Okay,
But I
yeah.
just, one of the things I noticed in here is like, there's councilmen in some places, council members and
Yeah.
others. So I just
A
want
lot of this was the old code that I dropped.
yeah,
in
if we
and
could just
gotten
make
all
it gender
cleaned up.
neutral.
Yeah.
Well, I've got like lots of little bits and pieces, but I'll just send
I
those.
think
along.
I think I fixed most of that in the last
Mm-hmm.
revision. It's up on SharePoint at this point.
Mhm. Yeah,
So I'll double check it.
Okay, and then the last one on the revisions is the septic revision, if we can just make sure we're on the same page with that, so we can set that hearing.
And that's on SharePoint as well. I've added Albert's changes and put it into local law form.
So again, next week, put up a shut up time. We're gonna set the hearing, so let's make sure we go through it.
Yeah, I think that you guys have any major questions on any of those changes that we made?
Amber has a few, but I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with what's there, but let's just, review it one more time.
yeah, I thought I gave them last.
Unless you want to do it now, Albert, you want to go over yours now?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, yeah, Bob, he put out on SharePoint the latest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
basically wrote down whatever
Yeah,
I wrote out, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and we'll go over it, with the public.
Do you
next
have
week.
objections, Amber?
No. I
Well, not
just,
that-
I had given like minor comments already. So I just have to review now that it's in legislative form.
Okay,
So,
all right,
All right.
okay.
Okay. All right, next, we're going to move over to the wetlands application. We have the Davies application that we heard. We heard the application at the last town board meeting. We had the public hearing. We need to discuss that. So this is going to be twofold. We're going to talk about the actual Davies application. I don't know if we should do that first or talk about have a discussion on the regulated area, the 75 to 100 feet, because they're kind of hand in hand. So.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I'm still trying to pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, there's two definitions that we need to, take a look at. Vegetated buffer, and this is straight out of the town code, 129-8 definitions. Vegetated buffer. There shall be a shoreline vegetated buffer, which extends 75 feet landward from the most landward point of tidal or freshwater lands, as those terms are defined herein. So that's the 75 feet back. When you talk about the regulated area now, you're talking about that extra 25 feet. You're talking about an area in, on, or over wetlands, and within 100 feet of the landward boundary of a tidal wetlands, or within 100 feet of the landward boundary of a freshwater wetlands as measured horizontally. It shall consist of the 75-foot vegetated buffer plus the 25-foot adjacent regulated area. And the reason we keep bringing this up, and we're bringing it back to the town board, and one half of our illustrious leadership of the CAC is here today, Howard, and Mark works, unfortunately, so he can't attend this meeting. I don't know if he's on Zoom or not, but it's something that we constantly wrestle with. What would the town board want to do with the 75-foot, and what would we like to do with that remaining 25 feet in terms of what we allow and what we don't allow? So that's really, I think the CAC is looking for a bit more direction, concrete direction on how they should perform as a committee as it relates to the regulated area. I think the vegetated buffer area of the 75-foot is fairly well defined, but we seem to constantly wrestle with something that's 82 feet from the shoreline, 91 feet from the shoreline. And the committee always says, well, do you need to locate the pool there? Or can you move that shed back? Or can you move this, that, the other thing? And obviously, as in all committees, we do it on a case-by-case basis. There's an application. They're looking for some type of variance here and some forgiveness and some negotiations. And I think the CAC is, the pendulum swings back and forth. That the CAC is trying to look for something a little bit more definitive. Howard, and you can explain it better. What would you be asking the town board to do? And then let's take on the.
Well, then we have the planning board. We want to hear from
and the
them.
planning board as well. And then let's take on the application itself.
Okay.
And if you could state your name for.
Right. I'm Howard Johansson. I'm on the CAC Committee, Advisory Council. I'm here to explain what our difficulties are in reviewing various plans for the wetlands that we get. We have quite a few that come through.
Here's what I found on the
We have one of the largest problems is when we get an area that impedes on the 75 to 100 feet. The 75 is pretty clear in the code. There should be no construction in the 75 foot. And I think we've all agreed that that sort of meets the DEC regulations and requirements for that area. Even though the DEC says, well, if it's bulkheaded, we really don't care. If it's over 10 feet, we don't care. But as a town, we do care. There are places that it makes a difference. And I think that's why it was put into the code. Between the adjacent 25-foot vegetated area, it's called a vegetated area because it has soil in it. It's used for filtering any runoff from the roads or beyond the property from getting into our waterways. Our waterways are very important. A livelihood of a lot of people on there and enjoyment of a lot of people. And I think that we have to sort of keep this area clear of any construction. Now, I know that's a problem because the law is only 20 years old. So if you had a piece of property that you've had for generations, you hate to all of a sudden be impeded from expanding in some way. And we take that into consideration if we know that that is one of the problems. But a property that is being bought that the people haven't done the research on, we feel they should try to avoid that area. And there are properties they can't avoid that area. We have one right down in Montclair Colony, which is the Myers, as everybody has seen so far. But we try to limit what they can do in that area. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is eliminate excavation. Let them put on a garage on a pad, a 1-foot pad, 1'6" pad, and we still have the earth below it to filter the runoff. That's getting more and more used up by every application we get. We want to put a basement in there. They want to do a pool in that area, which takes out basically 8 to 10 feet. People want a 7-foot deep pool or something. So we take that into consideration and we advise the town what we would like to have in that area. And that's where we are. It's a permitted area, so somebody has to permit. The only one that can permit it is the town board. The committee cannot do that.
Right.
We just advise you.
Mhm.
So if we could have some direction, so we don't go back and forth in that,
Mhm.
that would be helpful.
Mhm.
And we're going through that code item. We're trying to get in the next couple of meetings to review this portion of the code, what we think we should have. And
So how does the CAC, are they looking to recommend that the whole entire 100 feet is treated the same? Or are you still willing to talk about that 25 feet?
we're still willing to talk about the 25 feet because of the different,
Such circumstances?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a person that had a life of his family,
Right.
and all of a sudden you say, no, you can't build in that area to the new owner, all of a sudden this person's been paying, what, a couple of $1 million in property that is worth on the wetlands, and it might be worth only 1 million now because he can't expand.
Right.
So we try to take that into consideration, and we bring that up at our meetings. But we have to have some sort of direction how far. We don't have to, but it's just advisory. We would like it. It makes it easier for us. And we'd also like that when the plans are submitted, they are more complete. Right now, we know the last plan, the Davies plan, which we had, they didn't show details of the stairs going down. So thank God Ian was here and explained what it was. But a simple section through that staircase would have solved it. We don't have any details on the retaining wall, which is a structural item. It's got to hold back a swimming pool being built behind it. And then there was the other reason why we had to be so far from the house. And that's an architectural reason. Ian will explain why. But we feel shouldn't go into the 100 foot. There's no reason for it. It could be a little closer to the house or the pool a little narrower. But that's some of the items that we consider.
No, that's good. Now let's hear from Ian and the planning board and get some of your guidance and
Which hat are you wearing before we start?
I'm Ian McDonald, the chairman of the planning board, and I'm not going to speak to the Davis application because I cannot do that. In 2020, early 2020, we had a bunch of new members, and we picked it up on 2 meetings and discussed how we would address wetlands so we get some uniformity. And we kind of discussed the history of why it was put into place and how it developed. And I know we sent around the memo in March 18th. I can send it around again if you guys are. But in summary, it is our understanding, and one of our members even talked to Ed Bousman, who's the chair of the CAC, about this, that in the 1990s, the town was looking for ways to address construction in near the tidal wetlands or freshwater wetlands. And they went to the most stringent DEC standard of the 3 standards the DEC looks at. DEC developed their standards through scientific research, data collection, and calibrated their 3 definitions. One, as Howard mentioned, if the property had a bulkhead prior to a certain date, then they kind of gave that property a grandfather clause that they would be in. But going forth, they regulated up to the 10-foot elevation and or the 75-foot setback. So the town adopted the most stringent, the 75-foot setback is the standard, and they created an additional 25-foot zone, which was not to say you can't do anything in it. It was just to regulate in a way, get some additional mitigating things from the homeowner. It wasn't about taking away their ability to build in the area. And it was when I talked to Mr. Bousman yesterday again, it was about making sure the machinery doesn't go into the 75-foot and closer. It was about really trying to put up silt fencing, and the town has benefited in the past by getting pools with automated covers to keep down evaporation, cartridge filters, which is a relatively new thing that I had suggested, and I'm glad the town board took the initiative, which really reduced the amount of water that's wasted by backwashing. making sure that houses that are near shore peninsula overlay that don't have stormwater drywall collection get put in. If they have a buried oil tank, it comes out. So there's a lot of things that the town board can do by having this review process. But it is our belief that it's not about limiting construction within that setback, the 75 to 100 foot setback. It's about just having the opportunity to better control what's going on in the area. And that was, as we had discussed it on more than one occasion. And then we put together a memorandum in regard to that. So our thoughts were any regulation, further regulation should be based on actual science and data, and not just, oh, it feels good that you don't build in this zone. It's not a feel good regulation kind of area. It's more about doing with data collection, science, and getting some important features you said. And that was our stand.
Okay. Any questions for you?
One thing I just wanted to clarify on the 75 foot area, just so you understand what the DEC requirements are. The DEC basically prohibits building within that 75 area. There are a couple exceptions. One of them is you're decreasing the intrusion. In other words, you have a house that intrudes 1,000 foot in. You allow people to build with a DEC end-town permit a house that only intrudes, say, 500 feet in. If you take out that 1,000, so you're cutting down on the wetlands intrusion. The second is the DEC will basically send a letter of non-jurisdiction if there's a bulkhead on the property, at which case that becomes a town issue and essentially falls within whatever our code says. So it basically defaults back to the town. And, so those are basically the two exceptions to the 75 foot rule. The 100 foot rule, I think, as Ian was initially put in primarily to allow the town board to obtain mitigation for what was there. And then there's, if you look at actually the code, it doesn't say at any point that anything is prohibited in that area, only that a permit is required.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Ian. Michael? Yep.
I think this is an unusual opportunity for
You guys identify yourself
I'm
to the
sorry.
public. I'm sorry.
I always assume that everybody at
Yeah,
this
we
point
do, but people
knows
watching
me.
don't.
Hey, Mike.
It's Michael Shatkin, and I'm the new member of the planning board. I joined recently to fill the position that was vacated by Mike Bebon, and as a result, I didn't have the. I'm sorry.
You replaced Edward Hinden.
Yes, and I did not have the benefit of the discussions which took place within the planning board on this subject. So I guess it affords the town the opportunity to hear the dissenting view, to borrow a term from the Supreme Court.
Can I just say one thing? Michael just mentioned to me yesterday he was attending. He notified the planning board 20 minutes before
You should come up and, sorry, just realized no one can hear.
I'm not trying to put a new member on the podium, but we have not had an opportunity as a planning board to even discuss any issues with Michael. He attended our first meeting, which was a very rudimentary meeting. And he just notified the planning board 20 minutes before this meeting that he had an opposing view to the way we examine these things. So this is nothing that the planning board has discussed.
Right. So I would venture to say no harm here, because this is a discussion about a broad issue, and it's always good to bring to an issue as much information as possible. And my professional background is obviously an architect. I'm not an environmental engineer or a scientist, but when I ever advise clients, I always look at who they are and benchmark them in relationship to other institutions or other communities in other towns. And I went through that same exercise very briefly to take a look at who we are and benchmark us to other towns in the area. And Ian is right that I didn't notify the board of what I was going to do, but I think I heard about this on Monday, and on Tuesday, everyone in the room will recognize that I was sitting behind the desk helping out with the election. So I really, really did not have the opportunity to do this. And I'd be totally willing to table this and go back and discuss all of these things with my colleagues at the planning board, if that's a better approach. But my reason in being here is to have the most expansive body of information in front of this board before we undertake any changes. Because what we're dealing with right now is things that are problems that we all acknowledge on Shelter Island. It's, you know, we were talking about wetlands, but no. What we're really talking about is nitrates, and we're talking, you know, water quality. And because that is the purpose of these buffers. And we're also talking, we talked earlier about this process of raising our roads to avoid flood control. And that's considered one camp of a variety of camps that deal with flood control. The other camp deals with expanding wetlands, which is the natural environment in which floodwaters go if they're given an alternative to bulkheads and roads and buildings and solid constructs. So I just present that as a way of saying this is a very important subject. And ideally, what I would like to see us do is not look at our code and say it was in place originally at 75 feet for the following reasons, and then we're moving forward. We added 25 feet for a different set of reasons. But every once in a while, it behooves us to take a fresh, thorough look at something as important as this. And in doing that, the things that you look at is what's going on in the world and the surrounding communities. So I mentioned that very briefly with the limited time that was available to me. I looked at Southampton, I looked at Southold, I looked at East Hampton and Sag Harbor. And what I found was a few things. One is that the buffers are generally, when they're a single stroke of a dimension, are 100 feet, and that they were very limited. And I think the 75 feet has much to do with DEC saying, here's where we stop and we turn over authority to the community and let the community deal with local issues. And you know, this is our hard line. And then there's an ability to localize control beyond that.
Mike, can I get a quick timeout?
Sure.
All right, just as a coach, you know, get that quick timeout. How does the board feel about, we brought up this idea, Mike offered to do this, to go back to the planning board. This guy, he's a new member on a board. Yeah, the head of the board here, and discuss this first within the board and then come back to the town board.
Initially, I thought that's the way we should go. I don't want to backdoor the planning board, but I'm thinking, you know, Howard's here. We talked about the CAC. If you can generalize what your concepts are,
well, I think
then have a work session with the planning board. Go ahead.
Mike's a resident.
Yeah.
He can come to the podium and speak as a resident.
Yeah, sure.
He's not speaking on behalf of the planning board.
Okay.
He happens to be a member. Right now, I assume he's talking as a resident.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying. I'd like to hear his thoughts now, and then go back to the planning board for a discussion.
I don't think that was made, and I don't think that was made perfectly clear, you know, from the beginning. I don't want to see this committee start off on the wrong foot. We're allowing an individual to come in and speak as an ordinary citizen, as not a member of a committee. That's a different story, but that's got to be clearly articulated and upfront. Let me just finish. I don't necessarily think it's the best way to start out a relationship. However, if that's the feeling of the town board, by the way, I'm dying to hear what you have to say. It's not like I don't welcome these comments, because I think you're moving in a direction that maybe I would like to move in myself. I just didn't want to spoil the relationship early on. And that was my concern. I understand where you're coming from as a private citizen. That was not made perfectly clear to me at the onset here. So I'm just
Okay,
going on record.
so let's just go forward with that little bit of discussion.
I want to just acknowledge that comment and say thank you.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to change my behavior.
Right.
Because my main driver is always to do the right thing and be forthright.
Right.
And hope that we can all rise.
Well, we appreciate that
as individuals.
Right.
To talk about issues not as disagreements, but as
good point.
Debating.
But I agree. I agree with what you're both saying, and I like to continue this discussion. But I have a problem with you being here as a private citizen. You are a member of the plan. You're not representing the planning board, but you are part of the planning board. And I think you could be a dissenting view of the planning board. But I want to hear what he has to say, but I don't want to say he's here as a private citizen, because in theory, he's part of the planning board. And you're not representing the planning board, but I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it's a convoluted situation here.
I'll take myself out of the discussion here, because full disclosure, I think I'm going to like what Mike has to say.
I think we all
Michael
are.
has to say. It's something that I've been hoping for.
Right.
So
I have no problem with the discussion. It's the whole philosophy of, can the members of the planning board come in and say, well, I'm not representing the planning board. I would rather they had, I want to have the discussion today, but I would rather they had the discussion as a planning board, and Ian could say, this side feels this way and this side feels this way. Just like, sometimes Marcus will have a dissenting vote or a dissenting. I think that's important that we continue that. So go on with what we're doing today, Michael. But I think after this, we have to go back to the planning board and you guys have a discussion. And then you do your written recommendations. And the one nice thing that you mentioned at one point was the nice thing with the planning board and the zoning board is they give us both sides. They don't just say we voted 3-2 and that's it. They say this is the reason we voted for, and these are the reasons they voted against.
Yeah.
So
I just want to go on record saying that I think it's ass backwards. I'm just saying it. I just don't think that's the proper way to go. I think as a new member, you have an obligation to sit down with the planning board first, discuss this, and then come in as a dissenting voice. As much as I want to hear this right now, but he is a member. You can't. He's a member of a new committee. I just don't like the fact that we put a new member in that situation to start with. I think it's more like we're not in a rush here. It's not like there's a bomb going to go off and we have to have a decision within 30 days. This is and I agree, Mike, all the things you said about how important this is and the precedent, and you've done the research and you've looked out to other East End towns. I'm dying to know what you're going to say, but I just think for the welfare of you, the committee, and for respect of having that discussion, if you're still a dissenting vote, or I'd love to hear that from both sides. If you guys want to continue with discussion, I'm just going on record saying I think it's backwards.
But the most relevant answer would be Ian's answer. I mean, I think if we can rise.
Can you come
above,
closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
We're getting comments.
If we can sort of just rise above the idea that this is an opposing set of issues, that it's just a different approach for considerations, I think we could jumpstart the community and this board's understanding, because I would fully expect, no matter how, let's say, my ideas differ from the board, there will be, if the board is functioning, as I'm sure it is, that the board will potentially benefit and incorporate what I have to say. And bear in mind that this is not, one side versus another. It's just a presentation of information and methodologies.
My suggestion is we go forward with the discussion. And I'm not going to say we table it, but it's a public presentation. People will hear it. Then if you can, Ian, put on the agenda for the next work session, then you discuss it as a board, hopefully invite the CAC to the meeting. I'm sure people that are watching this meeting are going to want to, attend or observe. So let's hear the presentation, and we won't go any further with it until the planning board gets back to us.
Okay,
Okay,
and
that's
I'm
all right.
going to just go back with regard to one of the comments that I made earlier. And I'll say it in relation to the CAC's comments and not in relationship to the planning board comments. But it's a general perspective that we share around here because, you know, I think the island sometimes has a tendency to occasionally think insularly. We think about who we are, and we also, I guess, just live in a larger body of knowledge. And I want to go back to the concept of that it's, you know, we can't avoid, or we should not avoid, local knowledge and the things that we have experienced. But we live in we can look at benchmarking ourselves in relationship to the surrounding communities and see what other people who are in similar circumstances do and see what the larger body of knowledge is. And when we're in a situation where we're looking at something like an ordinance, that we tend to default very often to sort of fixing it. And I think that what we should do is default to taking a fresh look at it and then deciding whether this is something that warrants, you know, a fix, or whether the science and our knowledge base has advanced to the point where there can be benefits from a more global examination and change to the ordinance. And that's what I'm here to advocate. But I'm also here to just put some sources on the table. There is one source that I found which seems to strike a very appropriate chord here, and it's called the Environmental Law Institute, and it's the Planner's Guide to Wetlands Buffers for local governments. And I think that before we change, and it's a little dated, but I think the information is still relevant. And I think before we change anything, we should not only look back at what we have and where we've been, but we should look at a source like this, because I venture to say a lot more resources went into producing this than we would be able to garner on a local level, and we can benefit from it. The next thing I'm going to do is just extract information from it. But the only reason why I'm doing it is it's relevant to the question of buffers. And it gives a lot of different approaches to buffers. But there is one that deals with distance. And when I say it gives different approaches to buffers, some of our surrounding communities have not adopted, you know, 100-foot, 75-foot, but they have asked that the applicant submit or fund a report that deals with the specific science of that site and then sets a buffer recommendation, and then the board acts with regard to that buffer recommendation. But nevertheless, if we're dealing with a distance, here's the science from this source about distance. And that is that you only need 20 feet or 30 feet if you're dealing with sediments. And those are solids that are particulates that move with water as a buffer. And if you want to keep sediments from getting into your buffer, this suggests that only 30 feet is necessary. But most interesting, if you go on to a different category of pollutants and you're looking at nitrogen, the distance where you get an effective buffer to prevent nitrogen from going into either a freshwater wetlands or a shoreline or our bays is 100 feet. And when we localize that to shelter island conditions, and we know the overall situation that we're in with regard to nitrates affecting shellfish and nitrates affecting drinking water, that's an interesting dimension for us to consider. The other dimension is interesting is phosphorus. And that dimension is, again, in the low category of 30 feet. And then if we go into, and this is a very broad category, but it's also a very relevant category to Shelter Island, and that is the protection of wildlife, the suggested buffer in this category. And then this chart divides up, and I'm reading off the portion of the chart that deals with, they say, with the most effective mitigation, because the chart goes on to say beyond 100 feet that you continue to get nitrogen, as an example, distance benefits for with regard to mitigation. So if you go beyond 100 feet, yes, it continues on and you get more and more nitrate reductions. But what happens is at 100 feet is when that distance is most effectively deployed. So you're getting the most bang for your dollars for distance at the first 100 feet. And after 100 feet, it's a diminished result.
Just so I understand, is this runoff and leaching or just runoff or?
This is, and I didn't get into a deep study and I'm not a scientist at all, but this is described as buffer distance by function. So I think to answer your question, the answer is yes, it would be all of the factors that deal with the spread of pollutants.
Okay. What was the number for wildlife, by the way?
And the number for wildlife is kind of interesting because it says that a 0 to 50-foot buffer doesn't do much at all. And it starts where the effective buffer is 100 feet for preservation of wildlife. Now, obviously, wildlife is a very big category. The other thing, look, I'm going to be brief because I'm taking the suggestion to heart about going back to committee, but the request was to kind of give it the quick overview. I want to go to one other sort of source, which is the USGBC, US Green Building Council. And that recommendation with regard to sustainable construction. So if you're setting out to build a sustainable house or building, what is it? What does the US Green Building Council recognize? And this I can speak to because I'm an accredited or certified rather, US Green Building Council professional. At this distance is 100 feet. That is the recommendation of the US Green Building Council. One other subject that I wanted to cover just very, very briefly is our approach to what we call mitigation. And I've heard, I've been in planning my functional entry onto the planning board, which I think takes place somewhat after you actually join the planning board. I think there's an initial step of reading back over ordinances. And what I observed in reading back not over ordinances and also actions of the board is the following. And that is that our mitigation efforts in terms of saying, how can we make this situation better? Somebody wants to build a pool here. What do we do to offset that? And this may be a sweeping generalization, but I think our mitigation efforts generally concentrate on things that are done on the property. So if you want to build a pool and make it better for wetlands, we give the owner of the property the variance to move forward if they put a pool cover in or if they use a saltwater pool. Now, to me, that is the least, my own observation, that is the least effective form of mitigation. That the most effective form of mitigation would be, or a more effective form of mitigation would be if we were to divide mitigation into two categories, on-site mitigation and off-site mitigation. And on-site mitigation is the kind of, what can we do at the site? And in some instances that can be very effective, but off-site mitigation opens up a whole new category. So off-site mitigation would be that we could take our most neediest site in town in terms of a wetlands threat and say to that landowner, if you want the variance to build this, you have to proportionately participate in an off-site mitigation to enhance wetlands, improve the drainage of wetlands where they've been inhibited by a roadway, as we experienced over by Wade's Beach. Jerry,
It's almost like a transfer of development rights.
It's
concept.
well, basically, yes, it is, and it's almost like, if we're looking for analogies, it's almost like something in lieu of taxes, because the burden sometimes for us in terms of repairing island wetlands falls on the tax base. We could shift the burden to fall on development in general. Those individuals, and I don't mean to single out development and say, well, those are the wealthy individuals and they're putting in pools. That's not always the case. They can also be a variety of economic levels of people that have a project. And when you have a project, you plan for it and you anticipate expending money. And that's when you have the resources to
Michael,
not only do the
is this
project.
a concept, or is it just done?
This is not, everything I've spoken to is what's out there in the world. I wish I could take credit for any of these things, but I will say in my professional practice, I've always favored community-wide. I've always favored mitigation that has where it can have the greatest impact. And for example, I'll give you one example, and I was involved with the city of Newark in their sustainable action plan. And what we found is that where you build buildings and do stormwater mediation was in areas of Newark which had the least flooding problems. And in the poor neighborhoods were the areas which had the greatest flooding problems. So within that ordinance, we came up with the concept of creating a situation where we weren't going to ask people that were building a building to do a better job of stormwater management for their building. We're going to ask them to do something in lieu of that, to take that economic expenditure and put it into an area of the community in terms of stormwater management where it could have a greater benefit. And I didn't mean to conflict with or criticize. I just want to expand the thinking, and I want to make certain that when we do an ordinance, that it's done in the most effective and thorough manner that we possibly can do it. And I will take the rest of this back to the board.
Could you share the resources that you've referenced with the planning board, the CAC, and with the town board?
Absolutely.
And then also, just to your point, Jerry, I do know that when North Ferry had a DEC permit for something, I can't remember exactly what the offsite mitigation measure was, but there was something that Taylor's Island benefited from.
Okay.
So it has been done in the community before.
The only real restriction with regard to exactions, which is basically what mitigation is that it has to be roughly proportional to what the variance you're granting.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One other thing on just to clarify on some of this, I think it's certainly within the board's discretion to change or alter the way that the wetlands mitigation, et cetera, is dealt with. I'd recommend highly you do it by code rather than trying to torture the definitions and or change the simply change the procedures.
Okay, Meg.
I just want to say, Michael, that's some interesting information, and I appreciate you sending it to me. I'm curious as to how they came about the 100-foot as the best distance, because I know that there are a lot of variables that play into that, such as slope, soil quality, vegetation that's growing in that area. So, 100 feet may not always be required. If you have really dense vegetation and a very permeable soil, you may be able to get, you may be able to slow down that runoff significantly in less than 100 feet. So I'd be really curious to see what they used to come up with that. So if you could send that to me, that would be awesome. I'd like to look at it, and I'd love to discuss that at the next planning board meeting.
I just want to say that you corrected something that I didn't mean to imply. I meant to put the 100-foot out there just as a benchmark. And when people are distilling this down, when I say people, I mean surrounding communities that adopt a single, this one distance measure. Yes, the 100-foot seems to be out there more often than the 75-foot number. But I think, Meg, what you have touched on is what I'll describe as the more site-specific, more situation-specific approach that is being taken by other communities. And I would venture to say, if we have the capacity to operate at that more sophisticated level of looking at circumstances individually, and maybe that's, I've touched on this briefly, but that's plays into the idea of in some way putting the onus, or at least in terms of expense, to get more granular with the buffer area. The same way we sometimes do with regard to other applications, where there is an engineer that we engage to help us evaluate a site, that we would ask for the applicant to engage our engineer or an approved engineer to speak to the issue for a site with regard to what kinds of wetlands we're dealing with, what kinds of slope, what kind of soil conditions we're dealing with, and have that engineer come up with a site-specific recommendation for the buffer. I was using the 100-foot just as an example of when communities do just pull a single distance. It seems to be a larger number than the 75 that might have been inferred in this discussion, or at least with regard to where the planning board might suggest. I got the impression was suggesting that we go on buffers.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's move into the Davies application. Matt, you want to talk to that?
Thanks, Matt Sherman with Sherman Engineering. I'm the, one of the consultants working for James Davies and Olivia Scanlon, who are the property owners here. Project is taking out a previously constructed stairway that was done so without a permit. The approval of modifications to a deck that's on the water side or the landward side of the existing bulkhead. The deck predates the town wetlands regulations. Installation of some stepping stones going down from the house level down to where that deck would be, and then construction of a retaining wall. And then beyond that, on the landward side, a swimming pool. All of the construction is well over 75 feet from the wetlands boundary. The swimming pool is at about 90 feet, give or take, from the wetlands boundary. So it's all well within the adjacent regulated area, not within the vegetated buffer. To hit on something that was part of the previous discussion, several times it was mentioned that people, when they're looking for a wetlands permit, are looking for a variance or a variance approval. We are not looking for a variance or a variance approval. What we are asking for permission to do is something that is explicitly allowed by the town code. We simply have to get a wetlands permit in order to do so. So we're not looking for a variance or an exception. We are looking for a wetlands permit. By having the swimming pool specifically, because that seems to be the thing of largest concern and largest impact, by having it within the regulated area, I think, I don't know if it was Michael or Ian who hit on this one. I think it was Ian, that by having a pool within the regulated area, the town board can require, and typically does, an automatic cover, the salt cell disinfection, the cartridge filter. All of these things are significant mitigation to the impact of that pool. Whereas if it was 10 feet further away, that's not typically within the, it would not be within the wetlands permit. application, and they could put in a pool that does not have these benefits to them. So you know, that's really the long and short of this application. The only question I think that came up during the hearing was Amber had asked about the length of the dock, and I believe the dock is just under 113 feet, I believe, from the bulkhead to the end of the dock. And that dock goes back to, I think it was rebuilt in the 1980s. It goes back to several years before that, and then was rebuilt in the like 82, I think it was.
Matt, one of the issues that came up at the hearing was, you know, can we move the pool back closer to the house? And you felt the architect felt there was some safety issues. Can you have anything you can share with us, and we can look at, so we can?
I had I can pull up the drawings that we had, or the photographs that I had from the hearing. Let me pull that up. Let's see, bear with me for just a second. The swimming pool is going to be at, it's going to be right at about 15 feet, give or, you know, with plus or minus off of the existing covered patio.
Matt, how much are we into the 100 feet regulated area with the pool?
Yeah, I'll pull that up right now and I'll share it with you. The swimming pool is 10 feet into the regulated area, so it's 90 feet from the wetlands boundary.
Christina, he could share, right?
Share my screen. There we go. Okay, are you seeing the screen with the Davies Wetlands application on it? Okay. Okay, this is the overall site, and I won't belabor this too much, but Ram Island Drive to the northeast, Cockles Harbor to the southwest. This is a zoomed in version of it. Even closer, this coping on the outside of the swimming pool, that is 90 feet 9 inches from the wetlands boundary on the south portion, and the wetlands kind of moves away from the bulkhead. It's mean high water, so it's 95 feet 4 inches as you move up toward the northwest. So the closest point is just over 90 feet to the edge of the swimming pool from the wetlands boundary. So if we wanted to move it outside of the regulated area, we'd have to move it 10 feet in, and that would put us only 5 feet off of the building. That's very close to the building. So the idea of having this 15-foot patio between the covered porch and the swimming pool is what drove the design on this. It's not a terribly wide pool. It's 16 feet wide. So the you know, it's not a very large pool. It's not a lap pool or anything along those lines. It's a typical size swimming pool. And let me get to some of these photographs. All right, so this is a photograph showing, again, the house on the left-hand side with the covered porch area. This flag, hold on. This flag right here is where the edge of the pool would be, and that flag right there. So if you look at this line in the grass, that's pretty much where the edge of the pool would be approximately in relation to the edge of the house. So it's not, you know, you're not talking a very big distance here between the pool and the house as it currently exists. So again, and this is a little misleading because this is me, I'm standing at the edge where those lines are, where those flags are, looking back at the house. It's hard to get the perspective between the two of them. But that's, you know, it's intended to show that we don't have a lot of room to move back toward the house. And this is that same location looking out toward the surface waters. And you can see a flag right there and a flag right there, just as the grade starts to drop off and goes down toward the bulkhead. Those flags are where the outside of the pool would be, where this is about 90 feet, give or take, from the wetlands boundary. This one here is right about 95 feet from the wetlands boundary.
Matt, could you go back to the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
The retaining wall is how far off?
The retaining wall is 80 feet off. This is that dimension right here. Comes right into the retaining wall there at 80 feet.
And the idea is to excavate for the pool and then backfill against the retaining wall?
Yeah, what's happening here is because of the steepness of this slope, if we take out, by having this retaining wall here, we're going to dig down some for the pool and we're going to flatten this area out, and it's going to require less than if we were to just not have this retaining wall and we wanted to just continue that slope down through there. Then you would have a much more substantial wall on the water side of this pool. So basically we're giving ourselves a relatively flat area here where the pool and the patio would be. So it's going to require less overall site work and bringing in less soils and moving around things less by flattening that area out. We're also, because of the steepness of this slope, what this area is going to do is this is going to help capture stormwater runoff from this area, and it'll percolate down through, and it'll have the soil column in order to run through before it gets out to surface waters past this bulkhead. Also, because of this existing steep slope here, we've got this 15-foot wide non-turf buffer. So stormwater that's happening here, which right now just hits the bulkhead and runs over or runs down inside the bulkhead, it's going to have this 15-foot wide non-turf buffer to further help slow it down and help clean that whatever possible contaminants could be in that stormwater. That's what that non-turf buffer is there for. Again, it's not it's kind of like the automatic cover on the pool and those other mitigation requirements. Those aren't hard and fast requirements by the town board, which the board knows, but for the benefit of others, those are things that we typically will put in as further mitigation to help minimize or eliminate any types of possible negatives of a project like this. One of the things that Mike Shatkin had mentioned was not just having site-specific or project-specific mitigation. One of the reasons why we do that is if there is the possibility of a negative impact of a project, by putting in mitigation specifically for that project. For this example, a automatic cover on the swimming pool. We're concerned about how much water is going to be used for any swimming pool anywhere on the island. So as mitigation, we put an automatic cover on there. We reduce the impact of that swimming pool, the losses to evaporation, by about 90%. So in doing so, that mitigation is a huge benefit to this specific project. One of the things we've looked at in the past was, and it never really took off, but doing something like this, the site-specific mitigation, but then also going along the same lines of what Mike was saying, and put some money toward a stormwater control fund or something like that. So we're doing benefits for this site. Absolutely, it makes sense. This is where the project is. But then we could also do benefits for a site-wide groundwater improvement program somewhere else. It's one of those things where having having a fund like that could certainly benefit both this property owner and the island as a whole.
If we were to request moving the pool back 5 feet, what would happen with the spacing with the retaining wall? If you could bring up the plan again.
Sure. Yeah, hold on just a second.
If you move the pool 5 feet, would you move the wall 5 feet?
I will defer to Ian on that question. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, to the mic.
I'm struggling with moving the pool, and that's not answering your question. I do think it's a safety issue. You want to have some room around the pool to walk between the covered porch. Covered porch, deck, and the pool surface are going to be 1.5 feet, 18 inches separated. And shrinking that space to 10 feet from 15 really diminishes the use of that section of patio, and it creates in my mind, a safety issue, especially that's the prime place to put lounge chairs. Then someone's going to have to stumble around them, and I don't think that really works. I would have to go back to the homeowner to check whether or not they would be willing to move both the pool and the retaining wall, and have to get back to you on it. But from a personal standpoint, I do think it's a safety issue, moving it closer to the structure. On top of the safety issue of walking around it, the covered porch is set on a full foundation, and excavating deeply down around a full foundation could be potential undermining a foundation, which means more construction requirements up front.
Is that 15 feet? Is that green or is it patio?
It's patio set in sand, so it's a permeable patio.
So then on the other side, it looks like very narrow, like
that's
just brickwork and then green.
Just lawn.
Okay.
Howard?
I don't know if I'm supposed to comment on this. Help the situation. I don't know.
Can you put the survey back up, Matt? Because that's what Howard's referring to.
Yes, I have. I know it's architecturally looks correct from the air, but why can't the pool be at a little tilt and bring it out of the 100 feet? You know, bring it a little closer, like bring the right, let's say the east side up a little, and then it will slope down to be 100-foot clear on the other end. And I know architecturally you might not like that, but this doesn't show any stepping stones off 1.5 foot porch either. And you said it's going to be a drop right off the porch.
There's stairs right there. Matt, can you point to the stairs off the covered porch down to the patio?
Yeah.
Matt? Oh, wait.
Matt, can you point to the steps on the from the porch to the patio?
Where
No, the other by the house.
You've got these steps to the side. You've got steps from the patio porch to the patio on either side here. I can go to the photograph where you can see them a little bit better, a little bit of a step down here, little couple of steps there.
But Matt, where the bushes are in front of the porch there, when I was there, I stepped down like maybe 7 inches or so.
It exists at 9 inches.
9? Oh, sorry. But it wasn't a 1.5 feet.
We're rating in front of the house.
You're taking out 1.5 feet.
We're taking out 18 inches.
No. That's a 1.5 feet to make the pool level. But so you're making a larger drop, right?
That is the intention, yes.
So you're going to come off the porch 1.5 feet step.
You're creating the safety hazard by doing that.
Let him.
Oh,
Hey,
sorry.
That's not a safety hazard. There are stairs on either side of the main portion of that deck to go down.
Right.
The idea is to create possible seating on the deck.
Oh, I see. So you're not going to step off the deck directly to the pool.
Correct.
You have to go down the side.
Go down around the side.
And the other reason you had said at the hearing was by lowering the top of the pool there, it's less of a wall on the south side.
Exactly.
Or the whatever side it is.
That's correct. We're not quite, but kind of splitting the difference between those elevations. So you've got a little bit of cut on the landward side where this 15-foot dimension is, and then you've got fill on that other side, on the seaward side of the pool, between the pool and the retaining wall. So you're balancing those two areas out.
Okay. And the other mitigating feature that we have is we have an application to the health department for our IA sanitary system.
Oh, yes, that's shown on the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's up in this area here. So the septic is going to be to Mike's numbers earlier of 100 feet is the distance that you want to be for nitrates and phosphorus to get into to get proper mitigation, proper cleaning before they get to surface waters. We're over 100 feet from our proposed septic to surface waters. This is the existing one here, and it's just over 100 feet. This is our proposed, and it's about 130 feet. So that's, you've got more than enough distance by even the conservative standards for the leachate coming out of that sanitary system before it gets down to surface waters.
Howard, a question. Of the 7 recommendations that you gave for this application, the first one being moving the pool 5 feet.
Right.
The other 6, are you satisfied with the responses of the other 6? The depth of the pool application.
We don't have the depth of the pool. We don't have details of the retaining wall. That might, be a large excavation.
Rather than just focus.
We actually did submit details at the public hearing. I handed out a sheet.
Oh, okay. So
I can email those around again.
So Ian, those other 6 areas have been addressed other than the moving the pool to 5 feet.
Correct.
All right. All right. Jerry's.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that was after the hearing.
Matt dropped the screen. Oh, thanks.
Pam, I saw your hand somewhere. Pam?
Yeah, I can't seem to get on the video, guys, but yeah, my one comment would be that, thank you. There we go, that's better. My one comment would be that the DEC regulations basically can back up to about 300 feet on a property line, depending on the topography. So the DEC is not really a part of this issue. Their jurisdiction does change depending on the site. So I don't really see that that's an issue. My comment from last week was about what's regulated in this wetlands regulated area. And there really is nowhere in the town code that says you can build anything that you want in that space. It's not particular. And I would assume that this law that went into effect, I guess Mr. McDonald said it was about 20 years ago, was because we did want to protect an extra 25 feet of natural habitat. So, I mean, the question still stands. And now I noticed looking at those plans again, that retaining wall to the north side of that property is into the 12.5-foot setback. It's extending into that. I just noticed it on the plans just now. So I don't really know how you want to go further with this application, but my concern is, what are we regulating in the regulated area? What specifically? It does not say that you can build anything you there's nothing in the code. If Mr. Sherman can tell me where in the code it says he can build in that area, I'd like to know where it is, because I've gone through the waterways code many times now, the wetlands code. I don't see it. Do we have a citing on where it says he can do what he's proposing to do? Because he's claiming he does.
I'll defer to Bob DiStefano on that as the town attorney.
Ian, she can't hear you unless you're in the mic.
Matt's asking the same question.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll defer to Mr. DiStefano on that for what can and can't be done in that regulated area. The idea of it being a regulated area and what is regulated in it, it's a very, very simple answer to a very simple question. Everything is regulated in it. From 75 feet to 100 feet, everything is regulated. So if you want to build a house, if you want to build a swimming pool, if you want to build a pergola, if you want to build a walkway, everything is regulated, full stop. It's no more complicated or simplistic than that. To the retaining walls that are within the side yard setbacks, those side yard setbacks do not pertain to those retaining walls. So therefore, it's not an issue there. The overall distances from these structures from the wetlands, the regulated wetlands boundary, we're within that area that the code says we can build. We just need to get a town permit to do so. That's why we're here. I understand the idea of wanting to adjust it one way or the other. I think we've got good justifications for why this design, as we presented, is a good design, will not create a problem for the nearby wetlands. The 75 to 100 foot zone is the adjacent regulated area. It's not the adjacent vegetated buffer as what was mentioned before. It's not any of these other things. It's the adjacent regulated area. To Pam's point about the DEC and their 300 feet regulated area, she's 100% correct. For a tidal wetlands, the DEC has 300 feet within their jurisdiction before any other considerations are made. On our site, there's a couple of different things that get us outside of their jurisdiction. The primary one is the retaining wall that was there prior to August of 1977. That gets us out of the DEC's jurisdiction. If that retaining wall was not there, then the next thing the DEC looks at is the top of bluff or a 10-foot elevation at the top of a natural gradual slope. On our drawing, we've got the top of bluff is shown as it kind of crisscrosses from the bottom of the property to the top of the property at an elevation that ranges from around 20 feet to around 30 feet. I don't make that top of bluff determination. The architect doesn't, it's the surveyor who makes that determination. And if it's applicable on a given project, the DEC will review that and will either confirm that the surveyor is correct, or they will correct it and the surveyor will update their drawing. So, there's a number of different things that play here. Several of them don't pertain to this specific application. And they kind of, I don't know, they may muddy the waters a little bit. They may confuse the situation a little bit. But one of the reasons why the DEC gave its letter of non-jurisdiction is because they don't have jurisdiction over this project. And again, that's neither here nor there for the town's wetlands application and the town board's wetlands review. The depth of the pool, 8 feet at the deep end, 4 feet at the shallow end. It had been brought up on previous applications how the depth of the pool would have an impact on the environmental impact of a swimming pool. In a case like this, we are so far above groundwater that it's a non-issue as far as dewatering or impacting the groundwater, things of that effect. Whether you've got a 4 feet deep pool or a 20-foot deep pool, you're going to lose the same amount of water to evaporation, regardless, because you're only losing it from the top. You're not losing it from the total volume. So there's a number of things that are being tossed around that I think are a little bit misleading as far as the overall impact of this project and whether it's allowed under the current town wetlands regulations.
I do think it comes under part of the purview of the comprehensive plan, however, and what you can do in a fragile environment. And I know that the DEC has no jurisdiction over where you want to put this retaining wall. And I don't understand what's between the retaining wall and the pool, actually. You mentioned the coping, but then what's that distance going on there? That's, encompassing 20 feet of the regulated 25-foot area. I mean, on average, that's what the drawing shows. You're taking up almost 20 feet of the entire 25 feet regulated area. So it is a town issue. It's not a DEC issue. And I'm not saying that it is a DEC issue. The town needs to decide what it's regulating in that 25 feet. And it's up to them to make that decision. And I'm just asking them to give it some further thought.
My comment is meant to better the application. And I noticed a couple of things on the site plan. One is that the applicant is struggling with grade. When I say that, there's retaining walls and slopes. And what we do know about grass is that its runoff coefficient is pretty significant, especially when we're dealing with a slope. And there was one component to the application which hasn't been discussed, which was a beneficial component. And I yield to Matt Sherman to discuss this further, but we have a buffer, not a buffer, but we have a vegetation component, which is different than the grass. And I think it was described as being 15 feet wide. And this lawn area, I understand everybody's desire is to have a big flat lawn, or a flat lawn and a usable lawn. So I'm wondering whether there's not a place we could go with the application, or a suggestion that could be made to have that area that has vegetation, which I assume is meant as a further filter from the comments that were made. And also, when you're dealing with different types of vegetation other than grass, you have the opportunity potentially with the mix that you put in there to increase the slope in that area and potentially lighten the slope within the grass. Or if the contours just remain the same as they are, is there a benefit from taking that positive element that was presented as 15-foot wide element and making it wider? That's sort of a question or a suggestion. And that was specific to that area, which was mentioned as part of the application, which wasn't grass, and I assume was meant as some beneficial filtering feature.
And Michael, before you leave, could you maybe explain what if any effect that retaining wall and the flattening out of that area by the pool would have on the runoff?
Well, it depends on how it's managed. And by that I mean, when you build things like retaining walls and impervious surfaces, they tend to have an associated point of discharge, a single point of discharge. So in this situation, I think Matt could address this and say all of it's being recharged into a dry well of a sort, so it might not have a direct impact on the runoff that we're thinking about in terms of the hill, but I don't know the specifics of the application.
I'm glad you brought that up. The simple part of this is where the pool is and where the retaining wall is eliminating a significant part of the slope that exists now, I'm assuming.
No, that is correct. It's not really steep where the pool is. The pool is basically coming down to the area just north of where the change in elevation really starts to pick up some steam. But we've got the permeable pavers, and you've got a small grass area between the pool and that retaining wall. It's about 9 feet wide, give or take. It changes because it's a curved retaining wall, and it's the area around the pool steps back a little bit, but it's about 9 feet deep, and it runs that distance. So there's not a tremendous amount of volume that's going to be generated from stormwater that lands in those areas, and it's going to be able to percolate down through the patio and through that grass area and travel to groundwater just like stormwater anywhere else will. The existing slope, that existing grade, is there now, and we don't want to disturb that any more than we have to for obvious reasons. So allowing it to continue to function the way it currently is, but taking that non-turf buffer, and typically the town's been asking for a 10-foot non-turf buffer. We felt that it's because of the steepness of this grade, we would make it a little bit more. We'd make it 15 feet. So now Mr. Shackton is saying, well, if you're going to make it 15 feet, why not make it 20? Well, I mean, at a point, we're already another 50% more than what would typically be looked for because of the steepness of this slope. So we've already accounted for that. So this design, what it does is it takes into account exactly what Mike was talking about, the steepness of the grade, the fact that there's turf on the grade, and it puts in a very specific, very direct mitigation in order to handle that. So it's a good point, and I say it's a good point because we've already thought of it. So that's a plus for us. So putting in that non-turf buffer at the bottom of this slope is there for exactly the purpose that Mike's talking about.
Two other things. The proposed retaining wall is a dry stack wall too. It's not a solid solid wall, so some water will be able to weep through if it needs be. It's not being collected and then discharged at any one point. It's with the whole surface will act as a weep if that comes to it. Matt also outlined the materials that we are planning to put into the 15-foot buffer in front of the bulkhead. The bulkhead also sticks up to some areas to limit runoff, so the water would hit the back of the bulkhead and drop down if there is any momentum of that. And to get back to a point that was made before, and I started saying, during our previous discussion, you specifically said, and please confirm or deny that I'm saying this, that the adjacent regulated area does not prohibit any type of construction. It just adds to an additional degree of review, but it doesn't prohibit the construction.
That's correct. If you look at the code and at the charts that's out, it basically breaks it up into things that you don't need a permit for that you can just do, and things that you are permit, that's a PR permit required. In the 75-foot area, you'll occasionally see things that say no, which means you can't do it at all. So there's nothing that's specifically prohibited. The way the law works on this is that you're basically allowed to do what's not specifically prohibited. You know, it's not assumed it's prohibited, and you have to be specifically allowed to do it. So that's the way the regulation works.
And the other thing is in regards to retaining walls, the town does not regulate retaining walls. The only regulation I've ever seen in regards to a retaining wall is that the ZBA limits lifts to 4 feet, that you don't really retain 4 feet of earth. The King property over by Second Bridge, in that case, they put in 2 4-foot high retaining walls to hold back because they were not allowed to put in an 8-foot retaining wall. That's the only understanding on my part that of anything that affects the retaining walls. I've been told during public hearings in the past that the town does not regulate retaining walls.
The 25-foot regulated area. I mean, everybody keeps saying, you know, nothing prevents you from building there. It's just that a permit is required to build in that area. Be very clear. That's all. I just want to be very clear about that. And, you know, sometimes these applications come, and not to be cynical, but to be cynical. There's always the IA system installed. There's always the pool cover. There's always the cartridge filter, which are an expense, and I appreciate that. But it's an ask to get what you want. And I don't really see the town board restricting the ask. We really don't, as long as I've sat here. We tend to prioritize property owner interests over natural resources and protection of water quality. That's what we've done. And it's way overdue to implement more restrictions. I mean, some properties, older properties have pre-existing conditions that they can't comply with the 100-foot. Yes, I see. That's, as you would say, Amber, that's horse trading in that situation. But when somebody has the ability to do something outside of the 100-foot, I think it's time we start to do that.
So Albert, to carry that one step further and to take Michael's suggestion that, you know, we look at, you know, outside mitigation for other areas, we could do outside mitigation on that property or on a property and say, well, you know, you can do this, but we want you to put an IA system. Is that what you're saying?
But I mean, that's going to take some, obviously some time. I just, I don't know. I mean, this is an elevated area. Yes, the water is not an issue really here, but in other areas of the island, it's a serious issue. There's so much pressure on the saltwater freshwater interface that's encroaching. That's why we have saltwater intrusion, mostly in the southwest portions of the island. But it's an issue, and I think we really start.
No, I agree.
Really need to.
And I think I think it's good, Michael, that you brought these points up. Now we'll go to a work session with the planning board and the CAC, and you know, come up with some recommendations.
You know, one thing that Michael brought up that I think is a very good point as far as relevant to this, is to look at things that properties on an individual basis. And so I think the question here that you want to ask yourselves is, well, is moving the pool back 5 feet or whatever, 10 feet, going to give you a significant environmental advantage on this piece of property?
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you need to minimize it like that, Bob, if that's the case. I mean, you're making the argument for the applicant. What is that?
No, I'm
Well, he's
just
making the
no, I'm-
argument for the application for that specific
For a thought
property.
process being
Right.
individualized.
What's the result?
Yeah, what I'm
What's
wondering.
the gain? What's the
What's the property?
Yeah, I guess.
What's the advantage to what you're why are you
Don't do it just for the
take-
sake of doing it.
Yeah, to take it a step further, I'm wondering, and I toss this out to the engineers in the room, is how do we quantify this? Like, how do we quantify what the recharge is on the existing site conditions? And then when the new plan comes in place, can we quantify what the impact is?
And you can put that on the applicant, ask them to come up with why is
Mhm.
it's necessary, why did or
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if that's possible. I mean, we have, hunter demand analysis and, thief analysis and things like that to try and quantify things on water side, but like for site conditions, is there something that we could come up with?
Joe,
that's
you
more-
just came
more
in. Are you up to
scientific?
speed on what we're talking about? Okay, all right.
And so I just toss it out
Yeah,
there
yeah.
for consideration.
I just,
You should sit over here next week.
I just like, I think Matt said that the 75 to 100 foot is an adjacent buffer. It's actually in the code, it says adjacent vegetative buffer. So when you're taking and putting in a surface like that, you're taking away the vegetation. And that's another reason. We're trying to keep a nice clean area and not destroy it by putting in, concrete pools and stuff like that. And if we can move it or change the direction of the pool, it makes a big difference. We're trying to keep that area clear, but environmental reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we put in a pool, it's not environmental to start with. So I don't know why I'm even talking that way. Once you put a pool in, I mean, it's the most unenvironmental.
Make it as environmentally
Right.
friendly as you can. Yeah. Thank you.
People are allowed.
Anybody else?
I just want to say something. I did Davies with Reed, and nobody's saying that or remembering that it's a situation where the previous owner did a lot of things that were not right. He installed, tall fencing. He put an irrigation system all over the place that was leaking. He built the steps all the way down to the water that was in the setback and in the wetlands. And he is correcting all these things line by line. And I just want to say that. And also everything new he's asking for is totally allowed within the town code, and we allow it all the time.
Just for the record, that was Marcus Castle.
Thanks,
A member of
Marcus.
the planning board.
Yeah. Mhm.
Just those who can't see the screen.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so did we close that hearing? We just, okay. Okay, we're gonna move on then. Thank you. Next on the agenda is a little bit of procedure. We have to make sure that we're all on the same page with this, and we continue to keep doing it. In its wisdom, the previous town board or a previous town board put in place a policy that whenever we apply for a grant, that the town supports it by resolution. And the reason for that is there were times when we applied for grants, or the grant committee applied for grants, and we got the grant, and then the town board said, well, we're not putting any money into that. And that doesn't bode well with the grant givers, that, we gave you this grant and now you're telling us you're not taking it. So we have a specific grant. We did this last week or 2 weeks ago with a couple of grants. So we did it with something.
What's the example, Jerry?
Well, what we're doing right now, what we're doing is Joe's going to talk to it. We're in the process of putting together a grant application, which is due November 11th for hazard mitigation with the terminus at both ferries. Joe, you want to speak to it a little bit?
Yeah. I'm here more to brief the town board for the policy that Jerry referred to. We've been invited to continue our application for a FEMA-funded grant administered through New York State in support of hazard mitigation projects. This particular funding is designated for transportation safety, resiliency, and upgrades. We had a preliminary meeting with the state administrators who feel that our application to submit for planning and design funding in support of resiliency at our ferry terminals is well supported by their grant guidelines. And they encourage us to submit an application by November 10th. The purpose of the study is to fund planning and design services that would be managed by Shelter Island Town. The grant is exclusively for municipalities. We would be partnering with the North and South Ferry to provide them with these services to do an analysis of their operations, their terminal procedures, their storm resiliency, and provide them with a level of design documents so that they would be considered shovel-ready projects, so that they could be better prepared to provide emergency services and continued ferry operations through these adverse weather conditions, and in support of hardening projects that will help make them better suited for the effects of climate change and sea level rise. The overall intention of the grant is to support these projects for emergency service operation. And like I said, for resiliency, we're not sure exactly what projects that will trickle down to, whether that's specific tasks about ramp elongation or roadway elevation changes, but that is the purpose of the project, is to analyze comprehensively all these aspects of the facilities and provide recommendations and designs for the necessary changes, and to give each ferry operation a critical path. If they were to choose to embark on these projects on their own, they would know systematically where to invest their money and how to do so, so that they don't have duplicated funds or projects. And if they also were to seek additional grant funding, they would then have the project design and analysis completed, making them potentially better candidates.
I think that's probably the key component, Joe, as we discussed. You know, if we apply for these major infrastructure grants, they're going to say, well, what's the plan?
Right, what's the plan? So right now we have an approved and adopted hazard mitigation plan with the county. And in that is a priority to increase resiliency and emergency connections through the ferry for various reasons, whether it be just in support of storm operations or inclement weather, but also the ability to provide medical treatment and things. And
but carrying that one step further.
Right. So what I'm getting at is the hazard mitigation plan that's submitted is simply just an acknowledgement of this issue and a recommendation to pursue improvements. This particular funding allows us to go to the next step and have the plans and the analysis done so that we could advance to construction. What we have now that's adopted and approved is not sufficient for going to get construction funding. We don't have any specific plans or designs completed, and that's what this step is. So what we're seeking now is board approval to continue pursuit of the grant. We feel optimistic that this is something that we're well qualified for, but you know, of course, we don't know if this will actually come to fruition, if it's in fact awarded. The estimated cost now is about $200,000 to $250,000 in total. That's total cost, but the grant covers 75%. Our contribution would be 25% of the total cost. So depending on how the actual proposals come in from consultants, the total cost out of pocket to the town would be on the order of $50,000 to $60,000. That's just an engineer's estimate at this point, and we really have no way to refine that number further until we solicit proposals.
And again, just to carry on the conversation we seem to have all the time, is we're formalizing things we do. We're just making sure that we're doing this by resolution, and not just, well, you applied for this grant, but you didn't do what you said you were going to do, what the code says to do. So again, we're trying to make sure we do everything the way it's supposed to be done.
That's right. And this is an incredibly unique opportunity for funding. The FEMA money that's coming through is in the direct response to hurricanes that impacted the Gulf area this year. And they're specifically targeting transportation systems like ours. So this, I don't want to say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. That's not the case, but these are certainly unique opportunities to pursue funding for these types of projects. And we're currently talking with the varied companies, both north and south, to establish the terms of our partnership. There will have to be, at a base level, cooperation to share information, and at its most complex level, the potential for compensation and shared costs for the 25%.
It's something the town board has been discussing for a decade now, since Irene and Sandy, both tropical storms, not hurricanes at this point here, but caused quite a bit of flooding. All documented, pictures, photos. I've seen them in the last couple of days, people posting them. The big high tides that we've had, even in the last few days, have produced a lot of flooding around town. But this is, it's critical. It's something that's very important to the 4 plazas that support the 2 in the north and 2 in the south that support the ferry systems. So getting a critically injured, ill patient off the island is a must during an emergency. And you got to have those platforms. You have to have those ability to be able to do that. So I think everybody understands the need, that it is right at the top of the priority list, that this is an excellent opportunity to work, government working with private organizations to accomplish a task that's well documented and needed. So I think it's a great thing.
Chief, did you want to talk about anything from the hazard mitigation point of view?
From the hazard mitigation point of view, both ferry terminals have been at the top of our priority identified in our 5-year plan. One of the reasons why we created a grants management policy and procedure was to discuss the funding source. So it is the elephant in the room right now for me, because if the town board is going to consider going forward, and our part is 50 to 60,000, one of the requirements is to identify the funding source.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Amber.
Yes. No, I can just speak to it. When we got the cell tower money, we earmarked certain pieces of it, and some of it went towards future operating budget offsets, which we used 67,000 this year. We set aside. We had some capital projects we worked on during that year, the year and subsequent years.
4 of them, yeah.
But we still have $118,000 of that money sitting in fund balance earmarked for that. I also wonder about the COVID infrastructure money that we got, like if this could qualify for that. Right. So that could be a different source so that we could keep our powder dry in the other area.
123,000, I think.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So we have 2 potential sources to fund our share, the 50 to 60,000. The other aspect is Jen had to jump off the call before I could ask whether or not this is a reimbursable grant, and therefore we'd have to lay out the entire $250,000 potentially. Sure. We also had set aside $300,000 for grant funding so that we would be able to take advantage of grant opportunities. And then when the money comes back in, we restore the 300,000 and continue on.
Yeah. Which we've done in the past, by the way, on many projects, including road paving and everything else that we do. Laying out the money initially and getting the money reimbursed, just like we did, as we mentioned, with the equipment at the recycling center. We had to, kind of lay that money out first and then reimbursed for it. Joe, this is not a feasibility study, is it? This is for engineering costs. Could you just describe ultimately what the project, obviously this is what this money is being spent for, to come up with, did they come up with, like with other feasibility studies, several different things that you can do, that you can pick and choose, or is it designed to come up with, here's the plan to make this happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I wouldn't describe this as a feasibility study. That's not the intent of this project. It does require some sort of early stage analysis, because a big component of all of these hazard mitigation type projects is to establish what it is that we're designing for. So without knowing and not having a set criteria of a design flood elevation or design operating conditions, we can't effectively move forward with any specific plan. So the first step of the project is to analyze not only their existing operations and their locations, their operating elevations now, but it's also to look at some historical flood data and take that into consideration with future sea level rise predictions, future storm intensity predictions, to establish our new design criteria. This is sort of the first step in a long term of master planning for the island, is understanding what it is that we're designing to. There's a number of resources out there on state and federal level that set those types of guidelines, but this would be honing in specifically on the ferry operations on both sides, island and North and South Fork, to establish what our operating criteria will be and what it is that we're designing to. Beyond that, they'll then look at the operational specifics of the facility to understand that as that water level starts to rise, or as those storm conditions deteriorate, what aspects of the facility are most vulnerable and what aspects of the facility need to be upgraded, raised, extended, and in what sequence. The best analogy I have is that we can invest $100,000 or $200,000 in changing the slip dimensions, making the ramps longer, the fendering systems longer. But as you approach the ferry, you're going to have to drive through 3 feet of water. And likewise, you can raise the road 3 feet, but then you get to the terminal and you can't get on the boat because the ramp's not long enough. So we currently don't have a comprehensive plan that ties all of these pieces together. The ferries, being private companies, are incentivized to make their dollars get as far as they can with the resources that they have. And we don't have a master plan for these facilities, and we haven't provided them with any ultimate guidance as to what they should be designing for the long term. Each of these investments, whether you're replacing a bulkhead or a ramp, they can be 6 or 7 figures in themselves. Sure. And it's an opportunity now to provide these companies with the guidance so that even if they wanted to take these projects on their own, they would have recommendations and would be able to understand where to best put their own money if they wanted to chop off these projects independently. And they would at least know that they're not putting money someplace now in a project that may have to be redone because it wasn't necessarily done in sequence or with the right level of coordination. So to answer your question, I know I got off topic, but the real value here is to provide comprehensive type planning. Sure. To understand and tie together all of their operations with what we expect future conditions to be. And then one step further, to provide them with the level of design and drawings and planning that would allow them to go to, as many shovel-ready projects as the scope and the funding will provide.
Right. So for the public out there, Joe just used the term shovel-ready. And we can't apply for future grants, or they can't apply for some type of funding without this necessary step number 1.
That's right. But that's not certain. It's just that typically grant funding supports shovel-ready projects. Right. So it's not to say that there isn't any money that supports that. But if you have a project that is ready for construction, that's what the term shovel-ready signifies. You are a much better applicant. Because funds typically want to be invested in projects that they know will be most effective and that they know they can have the most impact in. So
you said it much better, but that's what I was getting towards. It's a necessary step to get to that step, to be able to do those things, to get it shovel ready.
Any other questions?
No. So the application is due on Wednesday, the 10th. So I wanted to make sure that we discussed it here today. And if we're all in agreement, we can do a resolution at our next meeting on the 12th. It can be, yeah, I think it's fine to do it, retroactive, but just to make sure that we're okay to go forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
And that's it for the actual agenda items. We'll go around the table. Albert?
I don't have anything, Jerry, but I would ask if I didn't get to you earlier about it, if we could have an executive session.
Yeah.
Just to discuss a contract.
Also, a litigation issue. Yeah, I was going to have it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
Amber?
West Neck Water. I don't know if you want to cover that.
No, you do.
Okay. West Neck Water met on Friday. And Suffolk County Water came in and presented a detailed plan about, what types of things they thought were going to need expenditures in order to, if we go with Suffolk County Water for a long-term operating agreement with West Neck Water, what improvements they would like to see made to their system before they would take it on. So they went through that, gave us some figures on what they thought, increased water charges would be, fees for, like water charge, and also a surcharge to fund the capital improvements. So we still have to continue working through some of the numbers. I'm going to work with Lisa. She was going to get some breakdowns between residential users and commercial users of the system. And then one of the things that was good news was as they've been monitoring the PFAS elevations at one of the wells, in the $1.5 million that the West Neck Water Board had come up with for potential capital improvements, we can pull that out so that we can lower by, I think it was $350,000, what they would need, the town would need to bond for in order to, bring the system up to where it needs to be. So we need to continue those number crunching. So I'm going to work with her on that to see what would the cost be. Is it going to be, 1.9% increase in what user fees will be for the district, because it's a self-contained district. So only the West Neck Water people pay for anything that happens for that, for the, the pumps and the water providing. So, and if it's, what's that cost going to be compared to if we run it ourselves independently. So we want to continue looking at that, as well as what a larger, negotiation points we would need for a contract.
It was also in some email discussion about a letter from the past mayor of Deering Harbor with his concerns to Suffolk County Water. So Joe got in touch with Suffolk County Water, and he's been in touch with Lisa from the board of West Neck Water. So let's talk to the current mayor of Deering Harbor, who's been in place with Suffolk County Water's operation, and get a feel for, if, the village, how happy they are with what's going on.
Just so I understand, Suffolk County Water presenting upgrades that they feel are necessary if they're going to take it on.
Yes.
To manage it.
Yeah.
And that to facilitate those upgrades, it's a 1.9% increase in.
That's what it looks like
per.
According to my calculations. I have some more questions for Suffolk County Water, and I need to speak to their finance people. But that was my rough and dirty calculation. And so I need to go back and pull out the $350,000 that's not needed for PFAS filtration.
But if you remember, West Neck Water made a presentation what they thought the town would have to go to bond for to upgrade their system. So when we signed the operating agreement with Suffolk County Water Authority, we asked them to evaluate that and to see what needs, they felt the system needed. So 3 months in now, they've made recommendations, including, what the presentation was from West Neck Water originally. So there's.
Yeah, and some of the proposed capital improvements, we've got replace distribution system, install meters and vaults, construct well number 7, which is on everybody's list. Reconfiguring the electric system for some safety issues. That might be it. I mean, it's just broad.
And again, one of the discussions that came up at the meeting was, one of the members was, they almost seemed surprised that there's 2 ways Suffolk County Water can do it. We talked about, they can charge the current rate, the current rate that West Neck Water is paying, even though their rate is less, and the town can bank that money and put it towards the capital improvements, or they can charge what they call the island rate and then put a surcharge on each customer. So when that was brought up, one of the members was kind of surprised. He said, well, if we bonded, you were going to have to pay it anyway. So it's the same thing, really. It's just, the West, as Amber said, it's not town-wide paying for it. It's the users are paying for it.
Yeah. Overall, as an outsider, I came in, that was a 2-hour plus meeting, and I saw the, last 75% of it. It was a good meeting. It was a good exchange. It was very helpful. And overall, I would say that Suffolk County Water really does try to accommodate in so many ways the concerns of the people in West Neck Water. But the big stumbling block, of course, is infrastructure. You know, the infrastructure of West Neck Water, which has been paid attention to, but obviously there's still a tremendous need there to get the system down right. And you can go with people that have a lot of experience. And one of the concepts that you try to explain to people is that when they build up the capital planning in a project like West Neck Water, there are hundreds of thousands of other Suffolk County payers of West Neck Water that contribute funds.
Suffolk County Water.
Yeah, Suffolk County Water that contribute funds for that purpose. However, conversely is true. When something else is done somewhere else off island, you are paying into that as well. But the rates,
when it's built into the fees.
It is built into the fees. It is built into the fees. But I think, I mean, it's a hard reality when you're trying to tackle, you know, these major capital plans and infrastructure items, and you have to commend the people that have been working West Neck Water for literally decades for the town, for themselves, volunteering their time, doing the best job that they can to get it right. You now have a professional group that's in there, as Joe has talked about, our town engineer has talked about the advantages of having a professional group of people there to be able to give you insights that, you know, they have and the abilities that they have. It's still a tough nut to crack, and the bottom line always is dollars and cents. So to make these improvements. So there's a lot of plan A, plan B, plan C type of thing, which you can weigh how you want to pay. You want to pay me now or pay me later. That was the end of the discussion, is really for the users there to come back in the town, to come back as a shared decision on how we're going to best pay for this big bill.
Joe, Amber gave a brief description of the meeting. Did you want to add anything to it, or?
No, I just came down in case there were any questions.
Mike.
I didn't have anything specific to add. I just wanted to be available in case there were any questions.
Now, how would you characterize the meeting just in a nutshell?
I think it went fairly well.
Yeah.
I think that a sanity check for costs, the proposal from Suffolk County Water came in quite close to the independent proposal submitted by Bob Holzmacher's firm. Some of the tasks were a little bit different, but the overall cost of the project was within, I think, 10% of each other.
Wow.
So a little bit of apples to oranges in that the task items were slightly different, but the total cost, and I think that's the most important number, and two opinions as to the state of the need for capital improvements came in very closely.
Right.
Yeah.
Amber, one quick question. Did they give any indication as to when they'd be able to give us a proposal for a contract? Or
That's the next step. I think first we want to make sure we're on board with Suffolk County, with West Neck Water, that we know they made their proposal of what West Neck Water needs. And now we have to decide, you know, with the West Neck Water Board, do we want to pursue, you know, another avenue to compare it to, or how do we want to move forward?
regardless of how we go, I'd like to get an early look at that so we can check the terms out and make sure that they'd be.
Yeah. I mean, we're not at that stage yet.
This would not be for a 6-month extension on the.
No.
This would be for a longer term commitment. Yeah.
I think what you could probably do is take the Daring Harbor contract and start looking.
That I
at it
have.
over. And then we've also, you know, we do have comments from the former mayor, so there are some things that we may want to incorporate in our contract that was not in theirs. So I'd start with those two just to get the overview.
Okay.
Yep. I am going to not talk about the community housing board meeting because my internet kicked me off at one point during the meeting, and then I had trouble rebooting the whole house to get things back. So I'll let you do that one.
Update on that. Yeah. My thoughts. Jim?
Yeah, this Thursday in the Reporter, there will be an article from Nancy Green, who's on the Shelter Island Health and Wellness Task Force. She's a great writer. It's entitled Eliminating Stigma. I would love to get everybody to read that article. It has to do with overcoming the stigma of mental health issues, mental illness, the advantages of seeking counseling and that kind of thing. So it'll be in this week's paper. It's a good article. She's a very good writer. And I think as a town, we are embracing the fact that we're moving closer and closer to trying to encourage better services, mental health services here on the east end of Long Island. So I also would like to remind everybody on Saturday, the Recreation Committee, which is representing the town of Shelter Island, which supervisor will be present for. I hope the other people will be present for it also. And along with the school, Dr. Dolja and the school board who approved it, are dedicating the fitness center, the fitness center over at school to Garth Griffin. So that is going to be held at the community center, 3 o'clock sharp this Saturday, regardless of the weather. So if we have a beautiful, spectacular day, we'll be outside. If it's a slight bit cool, windy, or rainy, we're definitely going to be inside. But I would love to see a good turnout. We made this accommodation to get the fire department there, be able to attend, as well as Garth's golf buddies that were down south playing, that they're back. So we're hoping for a good return on that. A lot of little work went into that, and it should be probably, if it starts right at 3 o'clock, we'll definitely be finished before 4 o'clock. And if you choose to go down in the Legion and share a drink, it'll be an open bar there, cash bar. You can do so. The Waterways Committee met on November 1st, this week. The Marks mooring permit application was approved. And so was the Rosin dock application, that also was approved. But the Weber mooring permit application, and I'll read from the notes directly, the WMAC suggested new coordinates, and they gave the latitude 41.08, 4773 north, and longitude 72.34, 94, 86 degrees west. The application is filed for a riparian mooring. However, the applicant owns at least one more mooring. Therefore, the application should be for a private mooring, and the applicant may need to be placed on a waiting list. So obviously, Dot, somebody just needs to look into the Weber application. Okay, all right, thank you. And that's really what, no vote was taken, it was tabled. So if, based on your research, if you say, give us a little direction, we'll definitely approve it at the December meeting.
So we won't put that on the, we won't put that on the
Well,
agenda.
they don't have, I don't have a
Formal
file for any of
application.
Right.
our applications. so,
Okay.
Yeah. The end of the meeting was designated for Peter Vilbig. He came in and for those people, a number of stops and calls that they get on their blotter. In 2017, 103, 2018, 134, 2019, 138. Last year was only 93, and this year only 95. These are where they actually get calls that they have to respond to. Most of them, by the way, most of the things that we see is a failure to display registration, validation stickers, and children 12 years or younger without PFDs. Those are the two top reasons that vessels are stopped for. Current trends that are noticeable by Peter and the people on the water are baymen. The charter boats hailing from Sag Harbor, making daily trips into Cockles Harbor and West Neck. They just see there's more apt to see that kind of thing. For hire water sports, more common. Larger vessels, which is not uncommon. We're starting to see much larger vessels with greater horsepower using inside waters. And this is Bay Constables notating this. The USCG documented several recreational vehicles. There's an increased use of jet ski traffic in the area. There are fewer fisher persons on the beach, though, than there were last year. And that was one thing, a trend that was going down, obviously, last year during COVID, when beaches were closed to the west, people came to Shelter Island to fish here. They're still fishing, obviously, off our beaches, but that traffic had been down. They talked about potential safety issues, and that's people that love to swim between Shell Beach and Wades Beach through the channel. And it's a great little swim. It's a nice swim. There's a little current that goes through there at times, sometimes swifter more than others. But the way boats come around that corner, very quick. And a lot of people don't obey the speed laws that are in that area and slow down. A swimmer in the water, if you're not paying strict attention, can become an easy target. So the Bay Constables, we're going to look at that particular issue for swimmers in the water there. Mooring inspections, what we've talked about. They talked a little bit about Condon Creek Dock. There are several empty spaces that Pete notices and the other Bay Constables and slips, and they would like the town board to institute if you're on it by July 1st, great. If not, let's make some phone calls and there's a waiting list for people to get on there. So to see perhaps 4 or 5 slips that go unused throughout the entire year.
Isn't there a use it or lose it thing?
That's what they're talking about here. There is a use it or lose it. So they'd like to see that instituted by not later than July 1st of a given year. Either on it or you're not on it.
They're all taken.
Yeah.
But they're empty. That's what you're saying. They're paid for, but they're not.
We can't do that.
I know that.
Yeah, but they notice that and they can report it through the town clerk's office. And there's a waiting list and the next person on the list would go on there. They also talked about putting at the dock there, a T at the end of the dock, the existing dock to perhaps, accommodate additional boats. They did talk about the new dock at Dickerson Creek Overlook. They did talk a little bit about Daniel Lloyd Road, the pulley systems down there and fees. And this is all in their minutes. And they did talk about the boat storage that they considered to be a very, very big success. So I think it was a good meeting. I would like to praise John Needham as the chairman of the WMAC. That we ran 2 meetings last week. Earlier in the week on October 28th, we were in a meeting specifically to look at the dock at Big Ram at Ram's Head Inn. And then we had our regular meeting here. But, he created a set of ground rules with the help of the supervisor beforehand and with the town attorney, trying to lay out some ground rules. I thought the meeting, it went about an hour plus, very well conducted. The beauty of the meeting was the guests that were on the Zoom were allowed to speak at the end. It had a 3-minute time limit, which everybody observed. And during the presentation, each of the 7 members of the committee were able to speak specifically about what they felt about the new dock. And there were some people who spoke for and some people who spoke against. But the most important thing was it was done in a very respectful manner. And I get, when it's done that way, people get a little insight into how the other person thinks. And I think it was very, very productive. And I think I praise John and the committee for doing a good job as far as that was concerned. That aside, the ball, where are we at? Jack Costello was on that meeting. He has been summoned based on some of the comments that were made to go back to the drawing board, make some minor adjustments in the application, resubmit that application. One of it was, I'll give you one example of the dock was 124 feet long. He said, well, I can get it down to 112. Well, 112 is still 12 feet longer than what we allow from a 100-foot residential dock. And with the guidance of the town attorney and the supervisor, they did not consider this a commercial dock. So it was handled as a residential dock. One of the things we talked about was the tremendous traffic that would go back and forth, not like on a residential dock where maybe once a day you have a party of 3 or 4 people go out to your boat and go out and come back, but people constantly coming and going and having dining and drinking and stuff like that. Maybe the width of the dock, instead of making it 4 feet wide, would be 5 or 6 feet wide to accommodate people coming and going to a service that they would provide to bring people back out to the 8 commercial moorings that they have out there. There was a lot of talk about the floats. There was some discussion about what they have currently and what they have in the future. So the ball is really back in the owner and Mr. Costello to come up with some some accommodations as far as what was discussed. I do think that ultimately, as all decisions do, they come down to a town board decision on what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept. But I think we have a spot where we're going to locate it. We have a framework to work within. I think we can get there, in due time. So hopefully, that'll be done. Capital planning, I'm going to hold off on the presentation of capital planning since the meeting has gone fairly a long period of time. At a capital planning meeting this morning, I did type up all the preliminary drafted notes, but I have some other things that I want to incorporate into this. So I will present that at next Wednesday's meeting here at Town Hall. Thank you.
Okay. And just a quick aside, the attorney for the inn was in today, got some documents from Dottie and reviewed them with Bob. So I guess they're looking at, their options.
Yeah, it's just, he's new to this, so he's just doing his due diligence.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And real quick, the Amber got cut off the meeting. The Community Housing Board met right after the waterways the other night. And it basically was to introduce all the members to each other. And we discussed the new legislation from the governor and how we need to go forward. And it's going to be a matter of, deciding on, the governor calls for an advisory board of 7 to 15 members. We have a housing committee of 5 members. So, I think the general concept is we'll roll this over to the advisory board, but the committee will make recommendations. We also have to put together a community housing plan. So I think we're going to try to go over again, because it's all new members, and look at East Hampton and see, a very successful program over there. And the committee also decided to nominate to us Chris Fiorio as the interim chairman until we decide how the committee is going to go forward. It was a good meeting. It was a very good meeting. That's it. That's all I have. Dottie, you have anything?
I just want to remind you to let me know when you want to do the Ramsed in dock and mooring. I'm not going to put them on there.
No, we're not going to put it on.
We're a ways away yet.
Yeah, the moorings have to wait until we finish the changing, the definitions for residents. So
right.
That one's on behind.
Bob, you have anything else for us?
Nope.
No. Okay. Anybody in the audience?
Yeah.
BJ?
It just occurs to me the whole user fee idea. Andy did a couple of
charters. Oh, no, microphone.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
Thanks, Christina.
I watch it all day. BJ Ianfola. About user fees. Andy did a couple of charters out of Greenport over to Sag Harbor. I don't think we're quite ready for this, but to put it in the back of our minds, and Sag Harbor, just to go to the town dock and load a few people, you're charged a fee, and it's substantial.
So they have a dock manager.
They have a dock person,
Yeah.
and that's so you'd have to sort of.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're not quite ready for it. But it's something. You just mentioned
Yeah.
boating
Yeah.
traffic increasing.
Yeah.
If we get to a point, it might actually pay for the person
Right.
to be there. And of course, anybody who was local or registered
Yeah.
vote locally wouldn't
Yeah.
be subject to that. But I noticed our town dock a few times trying to use it, and it was full.
Yeah.
This summer. So maybe we're getting there.
Yep. Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I failed to mention when you brought that up that at the WMAC meeting the other night, they did talk about the valve that's on the boats. That's for the water, for the flushing of the toilets. That again, the pump out. So we did have one of the 3 pump out go down this summer for a while, and it's something that the committee wants the Bay Constables to do, and the one thing here legally, Bob, that he always talks about is, and this is Peter's saying, I actually needed probable cause to board the boat to be able to do this. And I think what we ought to do is
to inspect it.
Yeah, to inspect it. What we should probably do is, no, it's just a health and wellness type of thing. If we've got to board the boat to find out there's enough life jackets, sufficient number of life jackets for everybody else, and do all these other things. Maybe one of the things that we want to do also is routinely, as a routine thing, just check those valves. Do we have to wait to see toilet paper or something go out of the back of the boat, or for the water to turn color before we can do that? because according to Bill Garrity, when these boats are returned back in, at the end of the year, a large percentage of them have these valves that are left in the open position or been cut. So they just constantly are flushing it out. And you're allowed to flush out, I think there's a certain 3 miles, I think, where you can do that. You can imagine a fishing boat where, 35 people go out on a fishing boat. And as they're coming back in, you're not 3 miles off out here, just flushing it out before, so you don't have to pay the fee to be pumped out. So these are things that need our attention a little bit more. So I love the fact that Peter, as a Bay Constable, is a great interim with the WMAC and has come in periodically working with them on a bunch of issues. This is another issue that I think, they can close the gap on.
I'd just like to question that probable cause thing. Do you need, I've been boarded by the Coast Guard with no
Coast Guard has a
cause.
slightly different standard.
Is it?
And the thing is, they can board for a health and wellness inspection.
That's it.
Yeah, that's
But
what
the
I
problem is, now, if they can look at it from just walking around and see something, then they can inspect it, but they generally couldn't inspect valves and such without probable cause.
I don't think you can create a law that gives us probable cause.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, anything else from the audience? Pam? You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Actually, I was just looking at the wetlands code again, and if you look at the definitions of regulated activity, I think it will help you sort out some of the things with the Davies application. And I guess my only other question, and I think it was just answered, is that we are not sure when the Ram Island LLC, Rams Head Inn LLC is going to have the next meeting or the public hearing on the dock. Because I've been to the WMAC has not really made a ruling, and I don't know when's going to be the next meeting in regard to that. If you know.
I think my understanding from sitting in on that meeting, Pam, was I think the WMAC is waiting for Rams Head Inn to come back to them with, whatever amended plan or whatever they're coming up with.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you'll just reschedule the public hearing because it's been delayed like twice already. Yeah. Okay,
Pam,
that's great.
What was the first part you said about the wetlands? I started to write it, but
if you just look in the definitions, there's definitions under the regulated activity. So, part of it says dumping and filling and depositing and constructing or expanding structures. There's a few, it's just in the definitions section, actually. Oddly enough, regulated area seems to be what the vegetative buffer is. And then the adjacent regulated area, which is what we're really discussing today, doesn't really have much to say. It just says lying outside the 75-foot vegetative buffer. So again, we had definition issues, and I know, but the definition there, it does have a list of a couple of them there. They're just generally what are regulated activities. I'm just noticing that. So
thank you.
So, all right. I hope you all feel well with the results of the election, and God bless you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Anybody else out there? Julia?
Julia had to drop off.
Oh, Julia. Julie?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, I'm going to make a motion. We go into executive session to discuss a litigation matter we're involved in.
And a contract.
And a contract also.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks, everybody.